The story begins with the rowdy son of a noble family who reigned in the academy like a king. However, due to his reckless actions, he was expelled from his family and dormitory. Ed Roth Taylor, or rather Taylor, is thrown out of the dormitory along with his belongings. The other students who once feared the tyrant are now relieved they won't see him next semester. Anyway, it's all his fault since he tried to cheat on the entrance exam. The problem is, the person who did that isn't the tyrant Taylor anymore. It's the protagonist of the story. He ends up entering the game The Failed Swordsman, where typically you enter as an overpowered character, but our protagonist ends up in the body of a third-rate villain expelled from the dorms at the beginning of the game. Indignant with the situation, Taylor shouts that this is all unfair, claiming he always lived a simple and ungreedy life. However, the students nearby call him a scoundrel for saying that after what he did. The failed swordsman sits silently as he waits for the students to leave. Among his things, he picks up a mirror capable of showing his stats. Even though he's attending a magic academy, his intellect is dragging on the floor, and his stamina is so low it's pitiful. This was expected. He's a third-rate villain who only appears to be beaten up.
Why you bully me?
The protagonist tries to remember what happens to Ed in the game. In the post-credits, it's shown that his fate is to become a beggar, wandering the streets. This leaves the MC completely shaken as he's now in the body of this beggar. Even though he doesn't know why he's possessing this body, he's determined not to let this be his end. The school is practically a city located on Mount Arkan. To escape the prying eyes of other students, he ends up in the underdeveloped forest. As it took him quite a while to get there, he had time to understand his current situation well. Even though Taylor has been expelled from his family and dorm, he hasn't been expelled from the school, which is extremely important since Sylvania is a top-tier academy, and as long as you graduate, you'll have a guaranteed future. Since the game is set in the academy, he can use his knowledge of future events to his advantage. Once he graduates, he can have a comfortable and lazy life. His main objective is graduation, but as this is a top-tier academy, the tuition is also very expensive. Without family support, his only option is to try to get a scholarship, but his stats are too low even for that. Before thinking about tuition, there are 3 more urgent things to worry about: shelter, clothing, and food. At least he won't need to worry about clothing since he has plenty in his suitcase. The problem lies with the other 2. He has nowhere to sleep at night, and thanks to his horrible reputation, it's impossible to get a job. His only option is to stay in the forest for now. At least he won't die of thirst since there's a stream nearby. There are 10 days left until the start of classes, during which time he'll become fit to attend this school. Surprisingly, Taylor can use windblade magic. However, since his stamina is terrible, even cutting a few pieces of wood leaves him extremely tired, and with tiredness, hunger only increases. When he was younger, his grandfather said he ate tree bark when there was no food. He lights a fire with magic and uses a chalice as a pot to heat it. Up close, it looks like chicken breast, but when he puts it in his mouth and eats, he vomits immediately afterward. After starving for a day and vomiting for 2, he concludes that wood should only be used in building shelters. The first step is to gather 4 supports for the cabin, but it's really difficult alone. He ends up falling due to the weight of the wood but uses all his strength to lift it and quickly tie them together. Even though he finds it wasteful, Taylor uses his clothes to cover the ground. After a whole day, he manages to finish the makeshift cabin. A system message appears congratulating him on creating a basic shelter. The beggar, who is extremely tired, says that the creation system is luckily working. Lived his life as a noble, so perhaps he didn't know he had more talent with his hands than with magic. To aid in hunting, he crafts a simple harpoon and tries to catch some fish in the lake. Probably his determination is the only thing driving him after so many days without eating. Taylor manages to catch 2 fish and fry them using his ignition magic. But when he finally goes to enjoy his meal, he notices someone approaching. One of the main characters and also the person who left Taylor in this situation, Princess Phonia. Ed Roth Taylor was a villain who used his noble status to hit on the protagonist's childhood friend, but clearly ended up beaten. In retaliation, he maliciously tried to manipulate the protagonist's entrance exam to get him expelled, but was caught in the act by the princess. Due to her insight ability, she can detect the lies and conspiracies of her target. Ed was in a pitiful state trying to invent lies, but was exposed by the princess. As we already know, he was eventually expelled from the dormitories, and now he has encountered the worst possible person at the worst time. Phonia approaches, asking why he hasn't been expelled yet. Taylor replies that he was expelled from the dormitories but is still a student of the academy. The princess is brief and tells him to leave immediately since she can't stand shameless people like him in this school. She continues to insult the beggar in every possible way, and she spends so much time doing so that his fish, which took 3 days to catch, ends up burning. Even though he's concerned about the fish, the girl in front of him is a bigger problem, as she really has the influence to expel him. Taylor mentions that the sun will set soon and asks why a princess who is usually protected by her soldiers is walking alone in an isolated forest. Fumiya thinks he's trying to threaten her and automatically prepares for combat. However, the protagonist kneels and says he's actually thanking the princess. Obviously, she doesn't believe his words, but her ability to detect lies perceives that he's telling the truth. Recalling the story's lore, the Roth-Taylor family used their name and influence to conduct human experiments in search of eternal life. Eventually, they were captured and executed, but as Ed was disowned, any connection with the family was severed. He may die of starvation or cold, but he won't be executed. Talking to the princess, all his words must be true, as getting caught lying is game over, or rather, life over. Analyzing the timeline, the reason the princess is alone, dressed plainly, and walking in the forest is definitely due to the class leveling test. In the game, this is a mission set by Professor Glass to find magical pearls hidden in the forest. The protagonist mentions that Professor Glass can be a bit perverse, and knowing the noble Princess Phonia, he must be aiming for the best class, but without her help, she will never make it into Class A. The MC says that in the south of the forest, under a giant tree, there will be a small gift he left there. When Fumiya approaches, she finds a small magic pearl. When he met Ed, he was definitely a liar and charlatan, but the tailor now spoke the truth. The next day, the class placement test finally ended. The professor instructs them to show the pearls they obtained. Some students with bright looks on their faces show the things they managed to find, but they are all placed in Class F. Glass explains that those who found pearls with low magical power are the only ones who reached Class A, and only 3 succeeded. Jigsaw the wild wolf, Lortel the redhead, and lastly the person who found the pearl in the guardian tree. That pearl had extraordinarily high magical power, so that person will be placed at the top of the class. Meanwhile, the protagonist, who had his lunch burned, now doesn't even have the strength to use a spear, and ends up improvising a fishing rod. In the game's story, since she was young, Princess Phonia saw through flattery and sophistry, so she developed the innate ability that doesn't allow anyone to lie to her. For this reason, Taylor had no choice but to speak the truth. In the original, the reason the proud princess began to be called the Princess of Love was because she failed the leveling test and fell to Class F. If the present princess succeeded and reached Class A, then the information he has from the game becomes useless. At this moment, we find out that the one promoted to the top of the class was not the princess, but the sleepy mage, Lucy Merrill. Fumiya knew that Ed was telling the truth about the pearl even before going to get it, so why didn't she pass the test? First of all, why did the princess hide her identity? She was embarrassed by the special treatment she would receive, so she decided to prove to herself that she could do everything alone. For this reason, she decided not to take the pearl as it would be something she didn't achieve alone. The title of Princess of Love she will receive in the future is not an attribute or ability. It is something gained by treading a fair path. Even though he baited her, he knew that the princess wouldn't accept the gift. While thinking about this, Taylor finally catches a fish after a few hours. Our future beggar has to start running early in the morning to make it to school on time, but in the future, every drop of sweat and effort put into the academy will be worth it. The opening ceremony finally begins, and the students can enjoy the food while listening to the speech. Our protagonist can hear whispers of people speaking ill of him, but none of it matters, as he can finally enjoy a good meal. Some girls nearby are impressed that the person who looked pitiful during the entrance exam eats in such a polite manner, while the girl with pink hair says he seems strange somehow, as if he were a completely different person. Today is the first day of classes in Sylvania. The teachers give an enthusiastic lecture welcoming the new students, while Taylor almost got expelled on the first day. Phonia talked about him to the dean, but judging by the smile of that grumpy old man, she must not have said anything bad. Still, it's better to be careful so that the original story doesn't change. Due to living in the forest, the protagonist ended up acquiring survival skills, which he literally uses for his survival, even being able to hunt small animals. During the hunt, the MC ends up encountering the girl with pink hair. She is Janica Faylover, the top student of the second year, and one of the main characters. As soon as she detects the protagonist's presence, she asks if he's the funny guy Merylda was talking about, quickly appearing in front of him and introducing herself. Janica says that this forest is the territory of a high-ranking spirit named Merylda, and she ended up saying some things about the unwanted visitor who lives there. Upon hearing the phrase unwanted visitor, the protagonist feels worried since he cut down several trees and killed animals, but Janica tells him not to worry since that's the natural order of things. Taylor is relieved that even a huge wild wolf has a good heart, making Janica realize something. She extends her hands and shows a forest spirit that signed a contract, but Taylor can't see anything. Taylor thinks that if he wants to be friends with Janica, he just needs to intervene at the right time, but decides to step away, saying that he can't see spirits and that he only came there in search of food, leaving shortly afterward. The best option now is to follow the original plot plot. Only then can he gain informational advantage. Besides, Jenica is someone he should never get close to. Seeing Taylor leave, she tells Merylda that he really is a fascinating guy and apparently really can't see spirits, but wonders how he knew that the guardian of the forest was a giant wild wolf. Jenica is also sad since she tried to be kind, but Ed was only dry in his responses. But Jenica hasn't given up on winning him over and says she'll have other opportunities to see him. Meanwhile, we realize the hard life the protagonist is living. The distance from his cabin to the school is extremely long. Even leaving in the early morning and running at full speed, he almost always arrives late. To study, he uses a burnt stick and a stone slab. On the way home, he has to wash his sweaty clothes daily and still check several other things for the next day. Because of this, he only sleeps 4 hours, but that's not what's really bothering him. It's Jenica who has been following him all day. She asks how he noticed, but it would be stranger if he hadn't noticed. Taylor threatens, asking if she doesn't know who he is. The worst villain there is, the liar and swindler, Ed Rothstaler. That's the judgment other people make of him, but Jenica doesn't know him yet. This phrase reminds the protagonist what kind of character she is. Someone who seems naive and foolish on the outside, but knowing what awaits her in the future, it's simply impossible to respond to her with a refreshing smile on his face. Since Jenica Faylover will become the leader of the first act, even though she's the only person who still smiles at Rothstaler, he'll need to push her away somehow. The protagonist says his life is a mess and he's been rejected by his family, so he asks to borrow money from her. Every year, Jenica receives a scholarship for being the top student, but that doesn't just mean her excellence in academics. As she's from a poor background, the only way to enroll and advance in school is with that scholarship. Jana's only weakness is money, so unfortunately, she has to refuse his request, even though that was his main goal. 3 days later, Taylor still feels bad for what he did, but it's better than getting involved with important characters and changing the main story. The problem is he's a magnet for important characters. When he goes to enter his tent, simply the most powerful genie in the game, Lucy Merrill, is sleeping in his cabin. She wakes up complaining that he's so noisy she can't sleep, but when the protagonist asks what he did, Lucy responds that she's not talking to him, but rather the wolf the size of a house behind him. She says that the guardian keeps saying incessantly to Taylor to save Jenica at all costs. Even though she says this and points to where he is, the protagonist still can't see anything. In fact, the biggest problem now is her. Like a beautiful lazy person, Lucy goes back to sleep, so Taylor ends up realizing how she got there. Even though she's small, Lucy can use her magic to leap like a kangaroo, always looking for the best spots to take a nap. This camp is deep in the forest, where there's no one around, so it ends up being the perfect place to sleep. The next day, Taylor realizes he must do something about Lucy while she sleeps. The girl is casting advanced spells and floating. It's also dangerous for her to stay there too long since it can distort the original plot. Taylor manages to set up a rope trap to catch small carnivores, but Lucy deactivates the trap by taking the dried meat to eat. He knows he can't beat her, but there's a strategy. The MC comments that the castle maids were looking for her. Upon hearing this, Lucy immediately says she has something urgent to do and flees. There was information that everyone ignored. Lucy hates the dormitory maids who take care of her like mothers. Thanks to this information, he finally managed to get rid of another main character. As he went out into the forest with an axe in hand, Taylor thought that the fact that she stayed at the camp for 2 days hadn't changed anything in the original story, but he realized he was wrong. A few days later, the MC observes the joint combat training mission. It's literally a combat exercise simulation aimed at reducing lethality, so fighters use fake weapons and mages use basic elemental magic. Above all, in this class is when all the important characters appear, from Princess Phonia to the lazy Lucy. Even so, the most important character in this event is the protagonist, who coincidentally is also named Taylor. So to differentiate him from our protagonist, we'll call him the failed protagonist. The next fight is his. Taylor already knew that everyone from the first year would win the matches and ended up not paying much attention. In fact, the only thing he had to pay attention to was Jenica coming to talk to him. Ed is impressed that even after experiencing that pathetic person asking for money, she still manages to be extremely excited like a puppy showing the match list. The protagonist obviously isn't interested, but Jenica asks if he doesn't want to know who he's fighting against. At this moment, Taylor experiences true terror. At this point in the story, Ed Rothstaler had already been expelled, so he didn't participate in the tournament. Things get worse when he sees who his opponent will be. It's simply a main character, Princess Phomia. Before worrying about the beating he's going to take, he hears the guy with the megaphone say that the next fight is for the failed protagonist, this getting him extremely excited to see her. In fact, at this moment it doesn't matter who Taylor is going to fight against. Although he has lived as a failed protagonist for a long time, in the game there are thousands of endings, and all of them are extremely difficult. so Taylor hopes the failed one will win and achieve the best ending. The problem is that his opponent, Lucy Merrill, hasn't appeared yet, leaving the future beggar extremely worried. Luckily, he realizes that she's sleeping on the reserve podium and goes there telling her to go fight. If the fight is cancelled because she's lazy, it will be a big problem for the story, as this is the first time the failed protagonist wields a sword. In the original story, even though he was born to be a swordsman, he never held a sword. During this fight, the failed one will cut Lucy's magic and quickly get close. Lucy will be surprised by his speed and will use intermediate level electric magic, being disqualified and making the failed protagonist the first to defeat her. However, what happens in the fight is the total opposite. With just one spell, Lucy throws the protagonist out of the ring, leaving him extremely injured. His story is of a failed person who exceeds other people's expectations, even though everyone drew premature conclusions about his match. The failed protagonist manages to get up and face adversity. As in the original, he quickly advances towards Lucy. Taylor thinks this is the moment he'll use lightning magic, but this time she stops the blow using wind magic, throwing the failed one away. Taylor is totally shocked, realizing that the original story has changed. While seeing the failed one leave the arena, he thinks that leaving him alone will definitely be a problem. The wind protection Lucy used is a magic contained through the contract with the high-class wine spirit Merylda. According to the scenarios, Lucy and Merylda are separate entities. However, because of the 2 days she spent in his cabin, she ended up signing a contract and became stronger because of it. As their names and the princesses are called for the duel, Taylor rushes over to the failed protagonist, completely ignoring Fonia, who's in his way. In this fight, the failed protagonist was supposed to win and gain confidence in his sword, but in the end he lost because of the existence of a character that shouldn't even exist. Taylor shouts for him not to feel down since his fight was amazing. If the failed protagonist's heart is broken, there's a chance our protagonist will need to work harder on the story. Then we see a bit of Fonia's past. The first person to discover her talent was Emperor Kloll. This ability wasn't given by a god or anything like that. It was something she created as a means of protection. But even though she could see through people, there was still a horrendous abyss in her eyes. The prota asked her to take it easy, while the people around, hearing him shouting to the failed protagonist, think he was just trying to make fun of someone who just lost. Even agreeing with what people say about Roth Taylor, and knowing he was a liar to the end in the past, she knows that despair was genuine. Then the combat begins. Fonia says that our MC confuses her and intends to come to a conclusion with this duel. Knowing that the only magics Ed can use are fire and wind, she starts with a water ball and wonders how he will react to it. Her goal in this fight is to forget everything and have a great battle, but the reality is that the protagonist is hit by the magic without doing anything. The princess, who was expecting a great battle, is confused, while Taylor is lying on the ground like Yansha, quickly assuming defeat to avoid getting beaten up anymore. The other students start laughing at him, since he ended up being worse than the failed protagonist. While getting up, Taylor says it was a good fight and he learned a lot, but the princess finds it strange that since he stepped onto the stage, she didn't make eye contact at any moment. First of all, he was never interested in the duel. As he runs through the corridors, we understand why the protagonist lost on purpose. He simply tried to act as an extra, and also the most important thing now is to find out where the failed one went, since if the world's protagonist gives up now, his life as a rich vagabond will derail. Before he can find him, he's stopped by the princess who followed him running. She's pissed off because he didn't even try to win the duel. Her head is already involved in many problems and he's just another one of those problems. When Taylor realizes she already has so much repressed frustration, he approaches telling her to calm down since there's no need to get so worked up. When she finally comes to her senses, she's embarrassed by the things she said, telling him to forget it. The beggar takes the opportunity to hit the road, but she keeps talking about what it was like living in a palace all this time and decides to ask one last question. Fumiya questions if he knows about the dark side of the Roth Taylor, and the reason why he bothered the failed MC is because he needed to be expelled from the family. Even though she's almost entirely wrong, her deduction was accurate about the Roth Taylor family, but the protagonist says he has no idea what she's talking about since it's still too early to investigate them. This only makes the princess even angrier since logically it doesn't make sense for him to be rooting for the failed one when he tried to get him expelled a while ago. Our Pinocchio decides to just ignore all the questions and respond with lies, even knowing he would be detected, making Fonia even more pissed off. Since she has no evidence to prove what she's saying, she calms down and clears the way for him to go deal with what he needs. As he's leaving, Taylor feels a bit guilty. She's already so involved with the main story and still has to deal with one more headache because of him. Taylor says that the burdens he carries couldn't be compared to those of a princess, but sometimes she needs to relax a bit. This isn't the palace where she needs to worry about everyone, it's Sylvania Academy. Throughout Throughout her life, Phonia saw through others, but this was the first time someone saw through her. The MC wasted a lot of time in this conversation. If he's not quick, his life as a vagabond, or rather, the whole world could end. But before he can approach the failed one, he's stopped by his childhood friend. She says that the protagonist is already going through tough times and doesn't need him to bother him. The failed one also gets up, asking why he's still at the school. At this moment, Taylor realizes something he had forgotten. As much as he's a failure, he has a fighting spirit that never falters no matter how strong his opponent is. While he fought against the princess, the person who ran away without looking back was Ayla Triss, who comforted him after the defeat. The failed protagonist asks if Ed has something to discuss with him. Taylor realizes that as long as Ayla is by his side, he won't need to work so hard, so he just decides to leave, saying that the protagonist is good with swords, different from him. To be honest, Taylor thought the failed one would do his job as the game's protagonist and do all the heavy lifting, but now he feels relieved, as the character he lived alongside for so long is still fine. Even so, it's not like the other characters are going to start liking him out of nowhere. Taylor keeps going to the door until he sees an explosion in the training field. Originally, everyone should witness this while they're in their seats, the fight of the gold Loratel's daughter and the spiritual witch Janica. Even so, the failed one and his friend are watching the scene. Taylor hopes he observes the combat well, since his first ordeal is approaching. Episode 1's boss, Janica failover. After the combat, people surround her as she was the only one to defeat the new students. Janica becomes quite happy and thanks everyone, but ends up seeing the girl she just defeated being taken away totally injured and feeling extremely bad about it. Unlike the original, Lucy defeated the protagonist, and all the attention that should have been given to him went to Janica. She already has many friends, but this incident made things even more frantic, which might actually be good for our little Tarzan, as he won't see her for a while. 2 weeks have passed since combat training. Without the main characters, he can focus on studying and survival. Even his stats, which were horrible, have improved a bit, but it's still too early to be lazy. At this moment, Janica appears in the forest, embarrassed to see the protagonist almost naked, but Taylor says it's her fault for suddenly showing up. While sitting by the fireplace, Ed asks why she keeps coming back there. Janica says it's comfortable like an ultra-secret base, and also would like to ask him for some advice. The protagonist, in his monstrous shape, asks what advice. She says he probably didn't see since he left before her battle, but she ended up hurting someone. In fact, Taylor knows that his opponent used a forbidden intermediate level spell, but that doesn't matter to kind-hearted Janica, who still thinks she may have overreacted. She asks if she should apologize, although her friends stop her, saying it was her opponent who erred first. But Taylor is different and tells her to do what she thinks is right. Janica is the lovely and cheerful second-year student. Everyone loves her because of this. If she has any self-criticism, people will always be on her side and encourage her, but Janica knows that even though someone is always protecting her, it doesn't erase the mistakes that were made. As she expected, Ed never stands unconditionally by her side. Taylor says he can't do anything if she's offended, but in reality, it's the total opposite. She wasn't offended by it at all. As innocent as Janica may seem, she actually understands people quite well. When the protagonist asked for money, she understood that he was indirectly telling her not to get too close, but it's precisely this side of Ed that strangely makes him comfortable to be around. The next day, we see that the protagonist has a serious problem. The failed swordsman game is considered a masterpiece, but few people have seen its true ending. As it is a multiple-choice game, there are several bad routes, and there is a character known as the beginner killer, as all encounters with her at the beginning of the game result in death. And this same person is chasing the protagonist everywhere. The daughter of gold, Loratel Kelchin. Loratel is designated as a hidden heroine. Unlike the princess, she's treated as a villain from the start, but her true face is only revealed in the second half of the story. At the moment you understand her loneliness and anguish, players are forced to choose between her and the princess. But our protagonist is not the protagonist of this story, and he bolts without speaking to her. Of course, the Gold's daughter won't let him go so easily. Loratel says Ed is a great inspiration, as even under difficult circumstances, he continues to strive. If you take away the fact that he's arrogant and egocentric, he really is someone to admire. Before leaving again, she offers 3 gold coins to hear her request. As Ed has been close to Janica recently, the mercenary would like him to help her make friends with her. 3 gold coins are really tempting, as it's the earnings of a whole month for some, but the protagonist is not a sellout, so he approaches and asks if the Gold's daughter also buys connections with money. Loratel puts the coins in Taylor's pocket, practically confirming his question. This money-obsessed fox realized she would enter into a political war with the princess for control of the academy, so she has already started to win allies. Taylor offers a handshake. Loratel thinks she managed to buy Ed. As for people who have been rich all their lives, a moment of poverty is enough to crush their hearts. But it's exactly those small coins that lead their lives to ruins. Attacking the unemployed is supposed to be very easy and simple, or that's how it should have been. But the protagonist returns the 3 gold coins, gaining Loratel's attention. Of course, he's not happy with it at all. If he had taken the coins, his life would have been a little easier. But the downsides of being caught between the noob destroyer and the beautiful boss are much more frightening. That night, Loratel didn't feel humiliated by Ed's obvious rejection. After the conversation, she understood the pros and cons, and as a perfect businesswoman, she won't miss any opportunity within her reach. In fact, her plan is to turn Janica into one of her allies. Loratel apologizes for what happened in the joint combat. Janica asks how her wound is since she still feels bad. The mercenary thinks about manipulating her using her guilt, but is surprised by Janica asking how her conversation with Taylor went. Even though she says not to talk about others' personal lives, spirits are first-rate gossips, so she ends up hearing about most of the conversations in the north of the forest. Janica comes close and says that sincerity cannot be bought with money, and she prefers Taylor's approach in that sense. Anyway, she goes to her room saying she still has a lot of work to do and apologizes for hurting her so much during combat training. Loratel is somewhat disappointed that all her attempts to get allies didn't work out, but something also catches her attention. For some reason, Janica seemed to be at her limit. At the camp, the protagonist lays out all his clothes neatly, but Lucy, who was passing by, says the place stinks and uses magic that explodes, throwing his clothes everywhere. But something catches Taylor's attention before he gets annoyed. The senior maid from Sylvania's best dorm, Belle Maya. Coincidentally, she was also the person responsible for expelling Roth Taylor. Ed tries to explain what he's doing there, but the maid already knows because of Janica, but certainly didn't expect him to be living like Tarzan. Taylor couldn't take his eyes off the basket Belle was carrying. The maids are a group of elite women trained for household chores. Inside the basket, she carries the best ingredients she collected in the forest. Taylor tries to remember if she's an important character for the story, while Belle says there's no need to be so formal, but upon remembering that she has no impact on the main lore, the protagonist says he could never underestimate a maid who's always working hard. He thinks there shouldn't be a problem with extra characters becoming friends, and after a while of flattery, he managed to hear explanations about various edible fruits and mushrooms. 2 of his creations were also completed, and to relax a bit, he starts heating up tea in the chalice. His fire magic and wine blade have reached level 10 from how much he uses them. The tea finally gets ready, and he can enjoy a beautiful sunset while drinking his tea. Taylor feels like he's starting to have fun with all this, until something falls from the sky, exploding his camp. It is heavily thrown back, while Lucy says something almost killed her. The MC is confused since she is one of the most powerful people in the world, but the person who threatened her life was Belle Maya. Of course, all this wasn't for nothing. Lucy skipped class again, so Belle was just doing her job and disciplining her. But when Lucy realized she was going to get beaten up badly, she teleported as far away as possible. Taylor, who's already mad at her for destroying his cabin, gives her a smack on the head, saying she ruined everything, but realizes the smack hurt more than it should have. Lucy says because of the teleport, her magic is drained, so he takes the opportunity to get back at her. Taylor now goes to the library. As he's tired of living like a beggar, he seeks knowledge to build a real cabin. A girl approaches saying it's time to close the library, and notices he's been studying hard. Elka says she sees people studying so diligently as motivation for her to study too, introducing herself and asking our protagonist's name. As soon as he introduces himself as Ed Roth Taylor, the girl is shocked. This is a familiar reaction since his fame precedes him, but she says he's different from what the rumors say, and that rumors shouldn't be trusted. Elka says she also knows someone as sincere as our beggar, and that she'll be rooting for him from now on. She leaves saying she needs to go back to her dorm until a huge earthquake comes, knocking the bookshelf on top of her. The end of episode 1 and also the fight against the boss has begun. It's been 2 hours since the disaster began. The kids gather at the camp, while Ayla explains that this is a spiritual summoning magic, or rather, a magic to summon a high-ranking dark spirit, Glaskin. The princess says this is bad news, as the only person who can summon so many spirits is the best second-year student, Janica Failover. Everyone falls silent when she says this, as everyone there knows Janica's potential. The only one who steps forward and is willing to stop her is the failed protagonist. He says for now, the spirits can't leave the barrier, but they're alone to deal with this. Alvira says if everyone there puts their hands together, they might be able to defeat a high-level spirit, but the coward Clebius is not at all in favor of this, as even if they manage to defeat the intermediate spirits and subdue the boss, they still have to face Janica herself, and to make matters worse, there are 2 high-level spirits there. Alvira wonders if she really did all this alone, even though she's powerful, manifesting a high-ranking spirit and controlling several at the same time should be quite difficult. Ayla says that's probably the power of Velosfer when it comes to evil spirits. They are the ones who really control the link. Jixu says that chatting won't help at all. They have to act, and the person who will decide what they have to do is precisely Princess Phonia. When everyone is looking, waiting for her decision, she remembers the protagonist's words and decides to go face her in an hour, but only the best students from each year will be able to go. Another student comes with a report. Audrey's hall and the potion warehouse are protesting and probably won't join the fight. Suddenly a student arrives saying a librarian's apprentice and a second-year student are trapped in the library. Phonia asks their names and finds out the girl is Elka Islan. As soon as she hears the name of her childhood friend, Jixu heads towards the library to rescue her, but the Daughter of Gold and the princess say the library is too far away and they need his strength now. The princess asks who the other student is there, but the girl hesitates to speak, making Jixu angry and asks what she's hiding. As soon as she hears the name Ed Rothtailor, Jixu's expression changes. The girl says he stayed there late into the night and didn't have the courage to send him away, so she asked Elka to do it. Everyone there knows what kind of guy Rothtailor is, leaving Jixu even more pissed, but Phonia needs him in the attack and asks to have a little faith in Ed. Everyone there is paralyzed after hearing what the princess said. Rothtailor is such a big jerk that even if she used all the words in the world to convince them, it wouldn't be enough to convince them, so Jixu sets off to find his friend. Some medium-level spirits try to block his path, but they are easily defeated. He is filled with pure hatred, thinking that if Rothtailor does anything to his friend, he'll beat him right there. Jixu's past is literally the phrase from poverty to wealth. He lived in distant savannas that even the power of the kingdom couldn't reach. There was the world where survival was of the fittest until the end of the day. Jixu is a descendant of nomadic peoples, but when he reached adulthood he was separated from his family and lived alone like a lone wolf, doing everything possible to survive as a true beast. But one day, a young girl asked his name and said he looked like a wolf walking on two legs. At that moment, Jixu realized he wasn't a lone wolf, but a cub abandoned by the pack. After that day, Elka's father accepted Jixu into the family. Pursuing the fast pace of civilized life made wilderness become a distant memory. The wolf cub became a man, but if it's to protect her, the man will once again become a beast. The reason for all this is because of the rumors about Rothtailor, a cheater who harasses freshmen. Jixu runs quickly through the school corridors. Seeing Rothtailor sitting on the floor, totally injured, he asks where Elka is while Ed says she's in the literature room. When Jixu enters, his friend is fine, sleeping peacefully. All his worries vanish for a moment. Looking around a bit, he notices several bookshelves surrounding her as if they were trying to protect her. The curtains are also drawn to block the spirits from seeing her, and even a note is written on the board warning her not to leave. Realizing that the blood on Elka's jacket is not hers, leaves him with only one choice, the one who sacrificed his body to protect her, Ed Rothtailor. 3 hours ago, when the shells started falling, Taylor managed to save Elka thanks to his daily strength training. He finds it strange that the epilogue of episode 1 is happening earlier than expected, but hopes that the failed protagonist and the other characters can handle it on their own. Of course, he can't just stand idly by. After all, time is of the essence, so he starts building a barricade around Elka to protect himself from the spirits. But at that moment, he realizes something. What makes Janika's powers special are her strong mastery of spiritual understanding and spiritual connection to Taylor. These are impossible knowledge to acquire since he can't see spirits, but since all the spirits summoned by Janika are materialized, this might be his perfect opportunity to increase his experience. After the battle, his spiritual magic skills have risen considerably, but still not enough to secure a contract with the spirit. At this moment, Jixu appears carrying Elka and asks what he's doing there. The protagonist simply responds that he was training, but obviously the wolf boy doesn't believe his words. Now he understands what kind of human being Rothtailor is, thanking him for saving his friend and that he will repay this debt at any cost. The friendship between Elka and Jixu was of little importance to appear in the main scene, so it ended up being forgotten. Even so, this man is a friend of the failed protagonist who trusted him from the beginning to the end of the story. It says he probably ran out of the student center, but now that he has confirmed his friend's safety, he must return to battle and help Taylor. Jixu is a little confused with Rothtailor sending him to help Taylor McClure and asks why he considers him so much. Ed explains that it's not a matter of consideration. The failed protagonist has the elemental cutting ability that is the only one that can harm that monster, so Jixu thanks for the advice and leaves. The protagonist thinks that now that he is given advice, the story should unfold like the original, but the fact that Jixu is still not the failed protagonist's best friend is strange. In the original, the protagonist learns the elemental move by training with Jixu, but since the end of Act 1 happened too early, there wasn't even a chance for that scene to happen. This also means that without the elemental elemental cut, no one in that group will be able to cause any damage to Tarkin. Because of his mistake, the whole original plot is crumbling. At the student center, Jigsaw apologizes for the delay and says he will pay for his mistakes. But the princess says that even if he had been there, they would have lost anyway. Everyone is extremely injured since the first attempt failed. The guard says that if they want to invade again, they will need to wait for reinforcements. Thonia is very worried about what will happen since luckily they managed to retreat from the battle. Her guard and the best first-year student were injured. Now she doesn't even know if there is a way out. At this moment of despair, someone arrives saying they shouldn't waste time going after Tarkin. Judging by the progress of the summoning rituals, soon it will be complete, and the best choice now is to split the team in two. Messing with the main story was the last thing he wanted to do, but now Taylor has no choice. Clevius asks if he's making some kind of joke, but Jigsaw, who is now on Taylor's team, tells him to shut up. The protagonist says they need to get through the fire spirit Tarkin. The problem is that Tarkin has an impenetrable defense, so his plan is for one group to attract his attention while the other passes to subdue Janica. Loretel says that's a terrible idea since they only managed to escape by sheer luck, and if the group attracting attention fails, things could go very wrong. But Taylor says they should only be assessing the risk if there was another option. Then Loretel says that the real problem is who will be part of the attraction group, as it is practically the Suicide Squad. The failed protagonist, being a good protagonist who likes to put himself in danger, says he wants to go, but Taylor refuses, saying that he will be needed in combat. In fact, they're seeing all this wrong. The attraction group won't die, and they also don't need to be divided equally. Only he, Clevius, and Loretel are enough to attract Tarkin. The two obviously don't want to participate in this, especially Clevius, who hates Roth Taylor because of his reputation, even not understanding his intentions. The princess decides to follow his idea and divide the team into two, the team of powerful characters and the Suicide Squad. As a precaution, she asks that none of them die, while all teams set out for their goals. In the hallway of the building, Taylor just tells them to follow his orders and everything will be fine. As they advance, the MC is sure they will win, even telling Clevius not to worry so much. As fearful and lacking in confidence as he is one of the strongest when it comes to combat. Clevius realizes that Roth Taylor is full of confidence and begins to think that there really is a way to win, since the only thing they need to do is to attract the attention of that giant lizard. He had only decided to join this team because the princess's firm attitude convinced him, but realizing he's not alone in this, he can gather a bit more courage to face his fears. Cletus approaches the lizard, which is already preparing an attack, but when he asks Ed what he has to do, the two simply vanish, leaving him alone to face the lizard. Desperately, Cletus starts to flee and shout that they were traitors. Loretel is outside listening, remembering the protagonist's words. As Cletus advances alone, Taylor tells her to leave. Loretel asks if in the end he'd always planned to sacrifice Cletus, but Ed says he's not a sacrifice. As much as it may not seem like it, he is one of the best students at the academy. Moreover, her most important function will be hers, since she is in charge of ensuring a path for the entry of the subjugation group and delivering a critical blow to Tarkan. As she prepares the spell, she thinks that one really shouldn't trust rumors. Ed knew that everyone might hesitate and doubt themselves, but Loretel is different and tells her to just blow everything up when the subjugation group arrives. Loretel asks what they are doing and orders them to enter to subdue the boss. She remembers that during combat training she ended up blowing up the ceiling of the hall. Perhaps that's why Taylor had left this function to her, and begins to find him quite interesting. As the subjugation group advances, Loretel remembers her other function. Cletus continues to desperately flee from the giant lizard and shouting that if he survives, he will kill both of them. The mercenary prepares the spell and remembers the protagonist's words. Even if they manage to attract Tarkan, they can't let him roam around the school, as that would destroy everything. The only way is to trap him, and for that, they first need to deal with his mana-resistant shell. Of course, Taylor already has a plan. While he runs up the stairs of the building, Loretel says that he was really right, and that without the elemental cut, it is impossible for anyone from the raid to defeat Tarkan. Arriving on the balcony of the castle, Taylor knows that what they need to defeat Tarkan is enormous firepower, and it has become clear who will use it to achieve that power. As he holds Lucy, Taylor is really angry, wondering how she can sleep in this chaos. Thanks to the destruction of the shelter, she had nowhere to sleep, so she returned to the place where she used to take a nap. Probably Belle's irritation is a strategy to take Lucy out of the scene, making her spend all her mana and fall asleep. The little witch ends up waking up after smelling dried meat. Taylor just throws all the food that was in the bag into her mouth and prepares to throw her at the giant lizard. Thanks to the exercises he did surviving in the jungle, his strength is enough to throw Lucy at high speed towards Tarkan as if it were a bomb. She explodes, releasing all her power at once. While the protagonist is almost dragged by the impact. He remains firm looking at the lizard, since this is the most important moment. Tarkin is a high-level fire spirit that has a shell capable of withstanding anything, but after being hit by Lucy's high-ranking magic, his shell is shattered. Knowing that now his attacks can cause damage, Taylor decides to take advantage of the opportunity to get as much XP as he can by delivering the last hit. Before that, we see Janika's story. Because of her talents, she always received a lot of love from her mother, who was proud to have her as a daughter. In school, this love and pride continued, as people could trust her for anything. Because of that, the pressure to meet their expectations weighed on Janika's shoulders. Seeing that everyone is there, she thinks she should greet them with a smile on her face as always. But who is really controlling her actions is not her, but the giant demon behind her. Realizing that the main fight must have already started, the protagonist just decides to leave it to them and continues on his goal. He tells Lortel that it would be great if Lucy had killed the lizard, but it doesn't matter, since they will end it themselves. Lortel asks how they will do that since she launched 2 ice spells, but nothing happened. The best way to kill the lizard is by cutting its throat, and since her ice magic is not suitable for cuts, he will need to do that. Lortel asks if it's not better to leave that to Claudius, but changes her mind as soon as she looks at him. Taylor will take responsibility for killing him, and just wants her to be able to stop his movements once. As he advances, he says he will be betting his life on her, but asks her not to consider it a bet, but an investment. As she prepares the spell, Lortel says she liked him much more than the princess who is acting like a monarch just because she is of royal lineage, and also intending to bet her life on it. Claudius can't stand to flee anymore, so Taylor advances to the lizard. Seeing the monster preparing the spell, he begins to understand why Claudius was so afraid. Even so, he continues to advance while preparing his wind blade, but before reaching the boss, something catches his attention. Gaskin's right arm appears in the sky, which means that the failed protagonist group entered the boss's final phase, and that things are going as expected, but the timing is not good since such a scene would attract anyone's attention. While facing Tarkin's magic, Lortel's attack hits him at the last second. Even in the midst of such turmoil, she makes no mistakes. The same goes for our protagonist, who used this skill thousands of times. The maximum level wind blade pierces Tarkin's neck, finally defeating him. Of course, he wasn't the only victorious one. The failed protagonist advances to the right hand, completely cutting it off. Due to the explosion, he is thrown away now with completely white hair. Even being a failure, he is really the protagonist of this story. Meanwhile, Taylor sees the sky crack, finalizing the end of this battle. Lortel says she has met many people who claim to risk their lives, but they were all cowards. Looking at Ed's empty expression, she asks what the problem is since they just went through the life or death crisis, and decides to introduce herself formally once again. They shake hands, but when Ed looks at her hand, the 3 golden threads are there. This time she managed to catch him off guard and says she now owes him a favor. Taylor is worried if she will really keep in touch since he doesn't want to get involved. Who comes to talk to him is the failed protagonist. Even though he doesn't like Roth Taylor, a debt is still a debt, and thanks him for saving them. Claudius, who is still angry, tells him not to show respect to someone like him since he almost died because of his betrayal, but everyone tells him to shut up. The princess also thanks him and says she can recommend him to the student council, but Taylor says there's no need since it was Lucy who truly helped defeat Tarkin and the failed one who defeated Glaskin. The alchemist asks if he's throwing away the credits out of shame, but Jigsaw tells her to be more respectful to her seniors. Seeing this scene, the protagonist is happy since he can see all the main characters at once. After all, each one there is playing their role in this world. The failed protagonist grows stronger with each approval, and his childhood friend grows stronger alongside him. The princess eventually accepts her fate as a monarch and matures slowly. Jigsaw finds his own path amidst civilization. Claudius gains a little more self-confidence while Alvera realizes that life is not just fun. They were all main characters who had their own roles to play, and in the end, they all received a trophy called success. Knowing this, he stepped back and went to look for something that couldn't be seen during the course of the game. On the stage where the confrontation took place, there is a locker where Lucy used to nap during exercises. Taylor always felt there was something wrong with that, so he needed to go there to confirm. Backstage, who was hiding inside the locker after the confrontation was Janica. He remembers the conversation he had with Lortel. The last time she talked to Janica, she managed to see a little of her room. In every corner, there were beautiful gifts symbolizing people's sincerity and gratitude. The problem is that there were so many that there was no space to put a book on that huge table. Her wall was full of stickers and notes that weighed on her like stones. The solution to that was simple: to store the countless gifts and remove the stickers from the wall. But Janica became obsessed with the fact that she had to honor the goodwill and sincerity she received. Needless to say, what she did was reckless, so Velosfer took advantage of the darkness and managed to control her. Due to the failed protagonist, losing to Lucy and her being seen as the heroine. This part of the story accelerated much more than it should have. The reason the failed one lost was due to Lucy's contract with Merilda. This only happened because she went to take a nap in a cabin in the forest, and the one who built that cabin was a character who shouldn't even be at the school. Janica tries to appear relaxed and says that inside that box is cozier than she expected. She certainly didn't expect Taylor to find her so quickly, since she's about to burst into tears right now. The protagonist remembers the wolf's request to save Janica. Perhaps Merilda asked him to do that precisely because he was the only person to distance himself from her. In the end, his attempt to make a contract with the auto-rank spirit failed, even after studying and training magic late into the night every day, always smiling at his family, friends, and teachers. She certainly went through many difficult moments in secret. Taylor doesn't know how comforting those words can be, but says she has certainly worked hard to get there. At the top of the stage, there is a proud parade of the main characters, where they are applauded and praised. Behind the stage, it is dark and silent. The villain of the first act leaves the stage as soon as the main characters move forward, even though he has witnessed the conclusion of the first act countless times. This is the first time he really manages to see everything. Since his spiritual abilities are at their maximum, he can see all the spirits surrounding Janica. All the spirits, including Merilda, seem satisfied with his action. Now, 10 days have passed since Janica's trial. She acknowledged all her mistakes and declared that she would accept the punishment willingly. However, the students and teachers expressed their support for her. In the second trial, the princess says that she could not be judged for attempted murder, as she was being controlled by an evil spirit and did not do it consciously. Even Lortel showed up to resolve the damage suffered, making the commercial association fully compensate for the restoration of the academy. Of course, it was not for free, since she got a contract that held the ordering fees on school supplies. The result of all this was that Janica's expulsion was revoked. Everyone was extremely happy. Her friends noticed her sadness and prepared a big celebration tea for Janica. She still seems a bit down, but her friends will avoid talking about anything related to the incident and try not to bother her. The problem is that when the two go to talk to Janica, she asks what the difference is between liking and loving someone. The two are startled, asking why she suddenly said that, but Janica replies that a friend has recurring dreams of a knight riding a white horse. The two get married and live happily ever after. Anis asks what else this friend said. Janica replies that when she looked in any corner of the room, she could see the person's face in her mind. Realizing the situation, Anis runs away as fast as possible, leaving her friend behind. She knows she needs to approach this slowly to avoid hurting her extremely delicate friend's heart, and also so that other people don't find out about Janica Feylover's secret love. She decides to say that liking or hating someone is a confusing feeling, and also that this is not the best time to be honest with her emotions. Besides, it is better to handle these matters delicately, since it would not be good for her reputation if other people found out. Janica thanks her for the advice and says she needs to return to the main hall to report her suspension. Her friend managed to relax completely since she avoided the explosion of a bomb at the school. Our protagonist, who saved money tirelessly, managed to spend a little due to the suspension of fees and bought a toolkit. As he returns to the camp, he meets Janica, even though he had to avoid her all this time. Now that the first act is over, she's just a supporting character, and he sees no problem in starting to socialize. However, as soon as he speaks, Janica hides behind a tree and runs away, unable to be honest with her feelings. Taylor finds it impressive how he managed to make a good and friendly person lose her composure, but he can't dwell on that too much since he's busy. Finally, it's time to leave the shack and build a real cabin to live in. On the first day, he chose the location to build the cabin. By the third day, he managed to gather the necessary wood for it. By the sixth day, he paused wood collecting since the semester results were announced. Apart from practical classes, all his grades were extremely high. An observation is that Janica continued to ignore him, while her friends looked at him as if to tell him not to approach her. After 18 days, the woodworking is almost complete, and since the holidays began, he could invest all his time in building the cabin. Lucy continued to fall into traps, making him think he should stop using dried meat as bait. On the 27th day, Bella Maya came to deliver herbs and mushrooms to him, but when she asked how things were with Janica, she was confused when Taylor said she might be hating him. On the 30th day, the cabin construction is going wrong. Unfortunately, our protagonist doesn't have Lloyd Frontra's knowledge and once again encountered a group of Janica's friends, but she fled when their eyes met, while her friend seemed to have noticed something. On the 37th day, Jigsaw came to help him. He said the failed protagonist is really a nice guy, as he had said, and after 45 days, he finally finished building the cabin. There was nothing on the floor and walls, but at least there was a roof, and if he closed the door, not even an insect could get in. Our protagonist went from being a beggar to a country bumpkin, and while resting, he heard a noise coming from the ceiling. When he went outside, inside to see what it was, he found Lucy taking a nap. At that moment, Janica appeared, greeting him. A few hours earlier, Belle mentioned the cabin that Taylor was building in the middle of the forest, and when she saw it for the first time, she found it more impressive than expected and wanted to go inside to see what it was like. She said it's extremely natural to see a cabin in the forest and want to go inside to see what it's like. In short, she's manipulating Janica to take the first step with Taylor. She then said she was passing by and was curious about the cabin, wanting to see what it's like inside. The protagonist finds it strange that the spirits didn't tell her about it, but Janica said they mentioned it briefly. In fact, they gave detailed descriptions of how Ed built the cabin, mainly talking about the muscles in his body, but she swears she didn't spy on him and knows all the details of how he's been living. Even though it's just a wooden cabin, the protagonist invites her to see how it is. Then finally, evening comes, and Janica says she owes a lot to everyone else, especially to Fumiya, Lortel, and all the others who helped by lending money for the tuition. Taylor says she shouldn't worry about paying back the debts since it's a generalization to think that you have to pay what you owe. Unfortunately, she can't understand that the incident happened because the weight of all that sincerity from others pressed on her. Even though so many people invested in her, Janica decided to move from state-of-the-art facilities to old-fashioned ones just because she wanted to owe a little less to others. But the Dex Hall is a shared room for at least 8 students. Living with so many envious looks would be like chaining Janica to a prison. Looking at her now, Taylor knows that in the end, none of her implicit problems were solved, but he says that if she decides to isolate herself, she can come by any time since it won't be a bother. She is very happy with that, and also says that if one day he is overwhelmed, he can ask her for help, as when that happens, she will help him at all costs. Taylor looks at the sky thinking about how overwhelmed he would be. The second semester is approaching, and with it the beginning of Act 2. A grimoire kept inside the school will cause a great storm that will devour the entire academy, and probably Lortel will do it. Nevertheless, the protagonist says he will never be overwhelmed, as it's not him who will have to go through difficult times, but the game's protagonist. In the story of the failed swordsman, the honor students of Ophelis Hall have a life as nobles almost guaranteed since they gained several advantages, but that's precisely the problem because of a period of heavy rain and a rule of the academy that only the students of Ophelis Hall were benefited. The inferior students of Dex Hall began to get frustrated by that, and eventually the repressed feelings of these students exploded into a rebellion. Of course, this didn't happen out of nowhere. Lortel instigated all this. The merchant contacted a representative of the inferior students and made him start the mess in the academy. Willain was an expert in provoking and manipulating others and already had a justification, so it was easy. A proposal was made to change this situation, but just the idea that the academy would have to accept the proposal was enough to enrage the common students, who made the situation big and showy after attacking Ophelis Hall. All those extremely expensive things were burned, causing a great cost to the school. The academy, which was already in a difficult situation due to the last incident, will be forced to sell the most important thing to them, the sealed sage's grimoire. Lortel watches the rainy sky, remembering her days of poverty. She knows that in this land of learning, there is plenty of light, but because of that light, she can see the dirty darkness in it. At this moment, the only thing she wants is someone the same, a disgusting person who lives like a gutter rat. During the revolution, the students shout for their rights, and throughout all this confusion, there are some main characters. The first is the intermediate boss of the first floor, Toto, the deceiver. The failed protagonist ended up beating him up, and thanks to that, he was bribed by Lortel. His role was to dominate the new maid who protects the first floor and open the hall, letting all the other students in. Toto is a character who doesn't play such an important role, as his only function is to delay the main character and his friends. However, the role that was originally for Toto is now being played by Ed Roth Taylor, who has just become an intermediate boss. To explain how this happened, we need to go back 2 days. While hunting for his meal, the protagonist realizes again that Ed Roth Taylor's body really has no talent when it comes to combat skills, even forcing himself to use the bow every time he hunts. His proficiency with the bow is completely ridiculous, and to make matters worse, he realizes that with each passing day, he receives more visits to his camp, and he lives quite far from the school. Of these frequent visits, 3 of them are worth mentioning. The first is the lazy mage, who usually comes to visit him at random times and bothers him with stupid questions. The second is someone he's genuinely glad to receive. Janica always shows up with some treats and ends up teaching him how to do household chores. His gratitude for her knows no bounds, even if occasionally she seems a bit out of the ordinary. Taylor had to explain this to mention the third visitor, the daughter of gold, and the person who is the black veil of the second act. She's probably trying to gather people who will be useful. Taylor intends to simply ignore her, but Lortel says she didn't intend to call him either. However, since Toto is unconscious, she had to resort to it. it. When the protagonist hears that something happened differently from the normal scenario, he immediately asks what happened to Toto. In fact, during the discussion with the failed protagonist, Toto ended up saying that he was worse than Ed Rothtailor, so he received a punch from Jigsaw, who was angry with his words. Loretal says the job is simple. He just has to grab the key to the hall and open it from the inside for the students to enter. Of course, Taylor doesn't support this idea and says that several other students could do it, but the mercenary practically says she only approached him because of his crappy reputation. Knowing he was expelled from the hall, Loretel thinks Taylor must be angry and wants to get back at the academy. However, the protagonist says he's not at all interested in doing that, but whether he likes it or not, he has to make the main story progress normally, and he'll also earn 20 gold coins for doing so. While protecting himself from the rain, the protagonist knows that this strategy of ruining the academy's finances is complete madness. However, because of this, a new group that rivals the princesses will appear. Mercantilism will fight with the student association to see who dominates the school. In fact, what matters is who the failed protagonist will choose, as that will be the winning side. When that happens, our beggar will join the side that's closest to winning, since he also needs to survive. At that moment, Janica arrives, drying herself from the rain. She finds Ed really amazing for being able to live there even with these rainy days, and says that if he needs anything, he just has to tell her, and she'll help him with pleasure. Since she decided to move to a smaller room, she'll have to throw away many of her things, and to avoid wasting them, she would like him to accept them. Janica is like a little puppy, talking about all the things she can bring, while the protagonist says he would gladly accept. Janica also asks if Lucy does this often. The protagonist knows that these extraordinary powers didn't come for free. Due to her laziness, she had to deviate from her destiny, but on rainy days like this, it's impossible not to reflect on her life. However, Taylor doesn't care and simply tells him not to pay attention to her. He remembers that Janica is still in Ophelis Hall, and when it is invaded, the protection room will be activated, locking the students in their rooms. So, to avoid any danger to her, Taylor asks her to wait for him tomorrow around 9 o'clock at night in the Rose Garden in front of the hall. She gets quite excited, thinking it will be a date, and leaves extremely happy. The MC knows that around the beginning of the semester, the rains will stop, so he can enjoy sunny days again. In Ophelis Hall, while training, Jigsaw says he lacks posture and didn't expect his friend to get so angry over punching someone. He finishes exercising and looks out the window, seeing a hooded man entering the hall. Since his vision is sharp, he can identify that man as Rothtailor. The MC asks where the other maids are, and the newcomer answers that they are all in the meeting hall. She has also prepared the requested items in advance, and with all preparations ready, the occupation mission of Ophelis Hall begins. The students outside shout that they can't take this treatment anymore, while Willing continues instigating the discussion. Suddenly the gate opens, and all the students rush inside. Willing approaches to find out who Loretel bribed, but is surprised to see Rothtailor there. The protagonist pretends he always agreed with the things he shouted and saw him as a hero. Willing feels like an idiot for judging him based on rumors and starts to get emotional, but Taylor pushes him to the next floors and tells him he needs to continue leading everything. In fact, Willing will be the one to take the blame for all this, while the first floor maid took the opportunity to escape while the protection rooms are activated, trapping the students. Walking through the hall, the protagonist thinks everything is going according to the original scenario. Loretel appears and says it was a good idea to leave all this to him, as the academy staff will repress this invasion as soon as they arrive, so it's better for her to finish things before that. However, before leaving, Loretel asks an unexpected question, asking if our protagonist has ever killed someone. Taylor obviously says no, so Loretel says that she has never directly killed anyone either, but she crushed the lives of other people to survive. She lived her whole life betraying and being betrayed, leaving everyone who crossed her path in misery. Even knowing that a person like her doesn't deserve sympathy, she ends up asking if Ed sympathizes with someone like her. Ed says no, as you need to take responsibility for your decisions, and with a sympathetic look on her face, Loretel says he should do what he came to do since there isn't much time left. The protagonist sits in a chair, waiting for the story to unfold. Willing will lose control of the defense spells and transform into the boss of the 4th stage, while our Taylor just needs to sit there waiting for the failed protagonist to arrive and fight, stealing a little time. Meanwhile, in the Rose Garden, Janica finds it strange that a carriage is arriving so late at night, but decides to wait for Taylor since he left a note saying he would be late. In fact, she won't leave until Taylor arrives, although she feels guilty for following what he was doing through the spirits. All the people who arrived there were immediately reported, and coincidentally, most of them were women. Janica realizes that the flower clip she's wearing may have been a bad choice, and decides to go to her room to change it. Meanwhile, a group of 3 people approaches the hall. Alvera is worried about the herbs she left in her room and intends to go in to get them. The failed failed protagonist asks his friend to try to stop her since it's dangerous for the other students if she's angry. However, neither of them can do it, and Alvera kicks the door open. As soon as they enter, they find Roth Taylor sitting in a chair, analyzing all the destruction around him. Alvera asks if he will try to stop them from entering and questions whether he can actually do that since all three of them are powerful and Ed is just an amateur who can only use basic magic. The three prepare for battle. The failed protagonist asks why he's doing this and what's happening upstairs, but he doesn't get any answers. He advances toward Roth Taylor, who defends himself by throwing a chair. Of course, a chair won't be enough to stop a swordsman, but it buys enough time for him to prepare a spell. Alvera thinks he will aim for the swordsman, but Taylor aims upward and hits a pillar on the ceiling that almost falls on the failed protagonist. Before the smoke clears, Alvera is attacked with a wing blade that cuts the strap of her bag, causing all the magical ingredients to fall to the ground. Seeing Taylor so far away, she seizes the opportunity to retrieve her potions. In fact, this is exactly what he expected, and using his ignition to set the entire hall on fire, Alvera realizes that the battlefield has already been established and that Roth Taylor's judgments were quick and precise. Previously, Jigsaw had said he had high proficiency in magic, but in reality, it's as if he were a god of combat. The battle begins with Ruth Taylor against three students, and our protagonist showing who's in charge around here. Alvera, witnessing the situation against our protagonist. She may be the best alchemy student in the academy, but there's a small problem. Alchemists fight with magical tools or elixirs, and without them, their combat strength is almost zero. It's common for an alchemist to carry a ring or a magical necklace, but Alvera, thinking of herself as a genius, never considered having one. Seeing the protagonist's demeanor amid those flames, she contemplates the possibility that he premeditated the entire fight. The falling chandelier, the small openings he created to launch a fire barrier, all strategically planned to take her back. She can't believe that this guy, Ed Ruth Taylor, could have thought of all this. Alvera still has one last trick up her sleeve. As a final option, she pulls a magic orb from her pocket and summons a spirit beast, applying a fire resistance formula to it to make it furious and amplify its strength. Now, their mage is desperately searching for a spell to extinguish this fire and casts a spell with that in mind. However, a wind spell blocks her attempt, and then a gust of slicing wind almost causes damage. Taylor arrives at the last moment to defend against that attack and tells his friend to pull herself together. In magical theory, Isla's friend is incredible, but she lacks practical experience and is panicking in this situation. Taylor and Ruth Taylor know this, which is why the protagonist keeps targeting his spells at her, preventing Taylor from advancing toward the protagonist and landing a decisive blow. But at this moment, someone catches Taylor's attention. Alvera asks if he can get closer to the protagonist and also makes her attack with the monster rabbit. The villain finds himself trapped with the rabbit coming at him and Taylor also charging at him with all his might. At this moment, Alvera runs into the flames and successfully reaches her bag where her magical elixirs are kept. Ruth Taylor aims his next attack at Alvera and rushes towards her point blank. Alvera recognizes that Ruth Taylor is as prepared as Batman. Nevertheless, she makes her attack by magically applying her elixir, throwing it into the protagonist's slicing wind, and says that her preparations end here. A large explosion occurs. The potion Alvera threw into the magic is a chemical reagent prepared from night butterfly flowers and bile mushrooms. When released with magic, it becomes a special chemical reagent that disperses released magics, extinguishing the villain's flames. While they were not looking, Ruth Taylor easily defeated the monster rabbit and asks what the meaning of this is. A mage who doesn't know how to use magic. Alvera gets irritated with our villain, acting as if he has the upper hand, and yells for Taylor to attack. He charges at the protagonist with all his might, but the protagonist, not being foolish, runs to a cabinet and quickly throws it to the ground, where a bucket he had previously prepared spills oil, reigniting the fire. A large explosion prevents Taylor from advancing, and he quickly stops his attack as Alvera desperately screams for him to stop. If a fire starts here in the Ophilis Hall, many people will die. Taylor then says he can cut anything, even fire, and resumes his attack on our villain. However, Alvera shouts for him to wait. As a keen observer, she noticed that the windows are open to prevent smoke from accumulating inside. The carpets are all moved away to prevent the fire from spreading, and there are no flammable objects nearby. Could Ruth Taylor have planned this far ahead? The shark-toothed girl screams as loudly as she can for Taylor not to do it. The protagonist draws his bow and arrow, preparing his next attack. Taylor, just a few meters away, thinks he will stop our villain. The protagonist shoots his arrow, but to Taylor's surprise, the attack is not directed at him, but at his childhood friend, who is also caught off guard by the sudden attack. With no time to cast a magical spell for defense, luckily for them, the attack is suddenly stopped by Alvera, who narrowly saves her partner's life. Thanks to a magical engineering tool that can attract any small object in sight, even from a distance, something about the arrow still catches her attention. To her surprise, the arrow was covered with cloth, so how did he plan to hurt someone like that? The more she thought about it, the more she began to sweat. She yells again for Taylor to stop going after the protagonist, because he must have another trick up his sleeve. Nonetheless, Taylor doesn't listen and charges furiously at our villain, and their swords clash. Our villain hears a sudden noise, exactly the sound the protagonist was waiting for as the second act of the Ophelis incident unfolds. This involves the second-floor boss, student Clebius, who enters in a panic, thinking everyone will die. With his objective achieved, he no longer needs to play the villain. Ruth Taylor lets out a slight sigh, thinking it's finally over. But there's no time for relief as Taylor lands a decisive blow, leaving him battered. Alvera is left speechless, seeing the protagonist's state, wondering what's wrong with him. Taylor goes to Ruth Taylor in desperation, asking if he's crazy and what his motives are for all this. Alvera feels nauseous, sensing that the protagonist was just toying with them during the fight. If Ruth Taylor really wanted to defeat them, he wouldn't have revealed himself and attacked after the chandelier fell, and yet he stood right in front of three people: a warrior, a mage, and an alchemist. During this battle, he didn't relax for a moment and was relentless. That's why Alvera thinks something strange is going on. Taylor grabs the protagonist by the collar to ask if he's crazy. Why go to such lengths? Our protagonist simply tells them to stop barking and go upstairs as fast as possible, which leaves the three of them very confused since Ruth Taylor had been preventing them from going up until now. Alvera then questions why the protagonist let them win. She was furious asking this, and her childhood friend saying it makes no sense. He is Ruth Taylor. There's no way this guy went easy on them. But Alvera doesn't listen and is convinced of this, wanting only for him to answer why he let them win. Our villain does not admit this and merely stares at the girl with a cold gaze. She won't be able to make him say anything. Suddenly, the door to the Ophelis hall opens, revealing a person who chose the persimmon flower brooch after thinking about it all night. This person had one question now. Why was the boy she thought would be waiting for her all dressed up now, lying on the ground, all wounded like that? This person was the crazy Yander Janica. Since receiving her letter, Janica had considered the possibility that Ed had been dragged into some unexpected situation, but considering his lifestyle and the way he handled the glass attack, no matter what the problem was, big or small, in Janica's eyes, our protagonist made her believe he would resolve any issue somehow. However, she now realized it was a mistake to think so complacently. Seeing the state of the protagonist, she began to reflect. Even though she said she would help Ruth Taylor no matter what happened, he never asked for her help. The reason he lured Janica to the flower garden outside the Ophelis hall, even going so far as to write her a letter, which was unusual for him, was the same reason he fought alone and keep her out of the battlefield, since she had already received several punishments due to the glass incident. She didn't know what happened here, but she knew that our villain treated her with consideration and was attentive enough not to involve her in all this. While she was thinking only about becoming as beautiful as possible for her beloved, he was in this situation. This made her even more furious, asking the three what the reason for all this was. Taylor tries to talk to Janica, saying that it's good she is here. Ruth Taylor tried to stop them and cause this fire. Alvera tells Taylor to stop being stupid. She is an enemy too. Janica says in a chilling and cold voice that she doesn't care about their reasons. All that matters is that they attacked the wrong person. Our villain tells her to calm down, but Janica, even responding softly to him, doesn't want to do that. The other girls soiled their underwear upon feeling the aura of a true elite mage. The creatures Janica summoned are all high-ranking, and there are many of them. The dark girl, her aura suggests she will injure them as badly as her beloved is now. He just needs to wait one more minute. Alvera, with just a look, knows that with this entire battalion of spirits, they have no chance. The girl pulls her friends and says to admit defeat. They don't stand a chance of even scratching her now. They were having trouble just against Ruth Taylor before. Janica doesn't want to hear anything and immediately sends her fleet at the three of them, believing they must be punished. Alvera shouts for Taylor to wake up. He won't be able to make Janica listen to what he wants to say. Taylor refuses to retreat because, due to this madwoman's furious attack, other students here might get hurt. He is a typical hero in this world, and that's when our not at all typical villain interferes, pulling the warrior and saying that when he says to leave, he should go. He throws him with a strength not seen in their fight. Ruth Taylor tells him to listen carefully. He will take care of Janica, and they must go up to the second floor as planned. Ayla is confused because up until now, the protagonist wanted to prevent them from going up, but he responds that he changed his mind. Alvera, indignant, says says he won't be able to deal with these spirits while injured like this, but quickly gets a slap on the head to snap her out of it. The protagonist tells her to grab her alchemy jars and go, and apologizes for tearing her bag earlier. She doesn't like taking orders, but she couldn't help but obey after such a handsome guy spoke to her that way. The three run to the second floor while the protagonist stays behind to face the crazed Janica, who is out of her mind. The beautiful girl was about to attack with everything she had until her eyes light up when her love approaches. Her heart felt that it was the protagonist coming towards her. Of course, the girl gets all concerned, telling him not to strain himself, that she will take care of the rest. He can explain everything later. First, she will end this chaos. Our villain raises his hand, thinking that this action is actually a sign of desperation, but that's not what Janica feels. The villain holds her by the shoulders and asks her to calm down with a smile. That dark look from moments before is now warm to such an extent that the previously crazy girl lets out a small moan at that moment. This is actually quite intimate for her. His large, warm hands are on her shoulders, and our villain insists on keeping them there, asking her to send her spirits away first. The strong wind in the room dissipates, and along with it, all the spirits are dispersed as well. The trio from before notice the change in the place and are shocked to see that he actually managed to stop that girl. He just gestures for them to go up quickly, as this girl stands no chance against him. The waifu that I know you all wanted in your lives calls out to her beloved, but our villain has no more strength left. Having accomplished his goal, he doesn't even have the energy to fall carefully, collapsing face first to the ground. The whole hall echoes with Janica's scream. After waking the man with that scream, she tries to understand the situation. She doesn't know what happened, but she remembers to be angry with those three for doing this to him. All she wants now is for him to promise to stop getting hurt like this, and of course, he does and thanks her. After all, he too would like to avoid suffering so much every time. He then gets up, thinking he did his job as the boss of the first floor. Now he can relax. But upon hearing Janica talk about a certain carriage she saw outside, a carriage with a golden crown, a slight worry crosses his mind. The golden crown is the symbol of the Elite Merchant Association, the adoptive father of Loretel, and the one who killed his biological father, the false boss who will disappear after losing to Loretel, the father of our waifu, the Golden King Elf. But the important fact is that his arrival at the academy earlier than expected means something is happening off the main story's tracks, something beyond our villain ED's knowledge. Watching from afar, the slender silhouette observing that newly arrived carriage is Loretel, asking the head maid if she also knows that mean-looking guy. Alice, the head maid, asks if she's talking about our protagonist whom they met at the camp. Loretel confirms, and Alice even makes a light joke, suggesting that Loretel has a thing for our protagonist. Loretel responds that our villain is quite cute, but that's not what she means. Rather, she had a feeling he was similar to Alice. On this, Loretel says she asked our protagonist if he could sympathize with someone like her, and his answer was not at all pleasant. He said she must take responsibility for the choices she made and left her mercilessly. That's why Loretel says people like them are doomed to hear such things from others. Alice, who had been the academy's head maid for about 20 years, started from scratch as an apprentice maid at 15. She proved very competent and became the manager of the Ophelis Hall. Most of Loretel's investments went there, and she spent a good sum to sway Alice from her righteousness. These losses created significant holes in Loretel's financial records, but she did not consider them wasteful. With a genuine smile, she tells Alice that she is very lucky to have someone like her by her side. Loretel found someone like her, someone who would abandon strict beliefs and values for a few gold coins, someone similar to herself. Loretel believes that only by knowing other broken people like herself can she stop feeling lonely, but regardless of her unhappy past or sad story, Loretel is clearly a villainous character, a hidden villain. She tells Alice that they will destroy the Ophelis Hall from the inside. As everything is going as planned, Loretel tells her accomplice that she will go to the storage room now, as she needs to play the role of the frightened innocent character who fled there. But unfortunately, folks, something went out of the girl's control. Alice draws her sword and says that a pitiful human like her, who never loved anyone or had anyone she could consider family, will be alone even in her death. Alice says she is not like her, and somehow, despite being terrified, Loretel expected this could happen. Meanwhile, on the second floor of the Ophelis Hall, the floor boss, Clebius, was controlled by Taylor through sheer force. On the third floor, the maid Kelly was defeated by the main group as well. Thus, Taylor and the group moved to the fourth and final floor, thinking that the only challenge they had faced so far during their ascent of the Ophelis Hall was against the first floor boss, our villain Ruth Taylor, who had even let them win. Upon hearing a scream from the fourth floor that scared even Alvera, they saw before them the visage of a person intoxicated with power, while the students who were part of this attack fled. The fourth floor boss, a hostage of the protective magic of Willain from the Ophelis Academy. The hall's self-defense system was now being used to attack the students themselves. As the battle took place on the fourth and final floor, people felt the tremors of the attacks and were terrified. Trembling and screaming in fear, wondering where the maids were at a time like this, the students decided to jump out of the hall windows, despite being on the upper floors. The entire situation turned into a catastrophe. Taylor's group struggled to face the hostage. Taylor asked Alvera if she had her night butterfly potion, which disrupts wizards' magic. The girl said it was useless because the source of the magic was an artifact, so she took the lead and used a weed reagent to block the boss's magical attacks. She assisted with defense and then kicked Clevius's butt to help Taylor defeat the fourth floor boss. After dodging dozens of spells, the hostage who was being forcibly used cried out as someone finally managed to defeat the artifact, causing a huge explosion on the fourth floor that was even visible from outside through the windows. Our villain saw this explosion from outside. Janica, still by his side, asked why he was still here. If he didn't treat his wounds soon, there could be complications. Our villain told her not to worry, that blood wasn't even his. The reason he remained lurking was to see this person arrive. Originally, the Golden King would be escorted by a large fleet of carriages, but his discreet approach told our villain that he had secret intentions here. This person wasn't supposed to be here now, so why? The MC knew that this carriage had been here for quite some time, but it was only leaving now. Was he waiting for the Ophelis Hall to be destroyed? Moreover, that person surprised our villain, the maid from the third floor, Shenny. She was one of the orphans raised by the head maid Alice. What our MC knew was that Alice had originally been bribed by Lortel, and Shenny was supposed to be the third floor boss. The MC then thought it would be impossible for Shenny to betray Alice, so the only alternative was the opposite, Alice betraying Lortel. If that were the case, there was only one possible future in this situation: Lortel's downfall. The villain Lortel engages in a political struggle with Phonia in Act 3 of the game, and is also the main ally of the protagonist against the Ruth Taylor family in Act 4. Our villain thought it was already difficult enough to take Toad's place as the first floor boss. Now would he have to take Lortel's role? The MC knew that was madness, so he had to resolve this too. For the first time, the protagonist said he had a favor to ask Janica, that it was urgent and he couldn't handle it alone. He didn't know how to explain it to convince her to help, but to his surprise, the girl agreed without questioning. She just told him to say what she needed to do. So listen carefully. Someone sent a letter to Elt informing him of Lortel's intentions to betray him and take control of the mercantile industry, as she knew it was Elt who killed her biological parents. By revealing her plans, talking about the purchase of the sealed grimoire from the sage, which was just an excuse to lure Elt to the academy, and this was bait to stab him in the back. In that same letter, it was mentioned that certain factors led to the discovery of all this, and that now the sender of this letter is in possession of confidential documents that can prove Lortel's plot. However, since Lortel offered a large sum of money to the letter sender, unless a larger amount is offered, the sender of this letter will stand by Lortel. His reason is that he is losing his vision due to an accident and has almost completely lost his hearing, and this will be his last year as a maid in this academy. And to everyone's surprise, the sender of this letter is the head maid of the academy, Sylvania, who betrayed Lortel and went to the side of her greatest enemy, head maid Alice. The woman also mentions in the letter where the money should be sent if Elt accepts her agreements, with all this money being sent to the orphanages that Alice manages. I think here we can understand Alice's motivation when she said she is not like Lortel. Both played dirty, but Alice's motivation is different from the lonely waifu Lortel. What do you think about this? Did you predict this? I bet not. Alice placed the cold metal on her neck and told Lortel not to move. Her adoptive father would arrive soon. The head maid remarks that she didn't expect to see that look on the girl's face. She thought Lortel was more composed. Alice says that Lortel claims to be seeking revenge on the Golden King, but in Alice's eyes, Lortel and her adoptive father are no different from each other. Lortel had no escape. All she could do was freeze in fear with the cold steel at her neck. That's when something heats up our favorite girl villain, an explosion, and the students group arrives at the scene. Alvera points out the responsible for this attack, and Taylor should be careful when defeating her alone. Lortel takes advantage of the situation and falls to the ground, claiming she is just a victim who was mistreated by the traitor Alice. The girl should just say she's okay and that Alice planned all this, but her face didn't match those words, and everyone is amazed amazed at her expression. What could be wrong with her? Lortel runs, covering her face from everyone. She now knows that the Golden King Elt is coming. That man trusts no one, so he must have come here himself. Lortel says the plan is almost complete. Elt will end up being responsible for the widespread tampering of the accounting books and the damage to this place, meaning he will be blamed for stealing and destroying Ophelis. She's never been closer. Now that he's here, Lortel just needs to send the carrier pigeons hidden in her room and hide. Everything will go right if she isn't caught. The lonely girl runs, motivated, but stops for a moment and remembers the words of our villain. If Alice is not like her, then there is no one in this world who understands her, which means as for Alice's betrayal, she expected it to be possible since she has been through it countless times. But the pain in her heart at this moment she has never felt before. Lortel melts into tears, and she even says it doesn't suit her. Since it's like this, she must do what she can to get to her room before Elt reaches the hall. At the same time, on the first floor of the main hall, Elt enters with his troop and then asks a person in front of him if he is a student and should leave here as soon as possible. The student, on the other hand, replies that due to a collapse, no one is allowed to enter there. This person is our third-rate villain from a game, Ed Roth Taylor. He says no one will climb those stairs now. Elt questions if it was the academy itself that gave these instructions to the student, and the MC says no, he is acting on his own while following the academy's rules. Our protagonist knows that only 3 people know the flow of history. Lortel, who wants to destroy Elt and take revenge on his childhood by taking his seat as mercantile president. Elt, who is here now determined to thwart Lortel's plans and buy the sealed grimoire from the wise woman, and using both at the same time, both Lortel and Elt, the maid Alice, the root cause of this plot twist in the story. The protagonist doesn't know Alice's motives for betrayal, but he knows she is on the 5th floor now, and knows that as the plot progresses, Taylor and his main group will run into Alice, and as our villain has already confirmed their abilities, Roth Taylor can trust them. This means he just needs to deal with the matter here, keep Elt out of the events in the Ophelis Hall to maintain the order of the main story. With that in mind, he shows that he recognizes the man in front of him. He is Elt Kelchin, the president of Elt Commerce, but he must go speak to the academy first. Elt then says he understands everything now. His dark aura takes over his face, and he asks if the boy is on Lortel's side. Look, 10 minutes ago, when our villain was with Janica and asked for a favor, he intentionally destroyed Jixu's room wall and said that everything was in chaos. So why is he still in his room? The guy says it's not explosions that will disrupt his training, but because Ruth Taylor is out there destroying walls. Now it's going to be cold when he goes to sleep. Jixu, when he realizes that Janica is also there, greets her properly. They haven't seen each other since the Glaskin incident. Janica apologizes for everything and seems disheartened by it. Jixu says that's in the past and she has already been punished for it. Now, more importantly, he asks if they are now a couple. Janica, embarrassed and shy as she is, says it's not that, but seeing her beloved look that way, she wonders if it bothered him. The MC isn't bothered by it. It's Jixu's fault for asking rude questions, and that's how he managed to ask Jixu for a favor, and the MC would repay him later. So at the present moment, when Elt was facing our villain and questioning if he had fallen for Lortel's monotonous appearance, Elt says he might enjoy a few coins she offered him, but Elt asserts that Lortel has the cunning of a fox and stabs others in the back as soon as they turn around. He knows because he raised her. The Golden King even says he would love to pay twice the amount of gold coins that Fox offered. So Roth Taylor thanks for the offer, but they didn't promise him any gold coins. So what's the point of 00? Elt understands what the boy was trying to get at. If words weren't enough to convince him, force must be. Looking around, our villain was surrounded. He tried to escape, but it wouldn't be possible. That's when the 2 people arrived to help him. Jixu and Janica attacked the soldiers. He asked the 2 to take care of this, and he will repay this favor later, and the 2 are not intimidated by the enemy they will have to face. They engage in combat, and that doesn't matter as much as our villain's objective. He should find Lortel and ask her about this situation, and after a moment of distraction, he realizes he's in the girl's path. Our villain wastes no time and asks if she hasn't managed to leave yet. The girl, of course, is shocked. She didn't expect to encounter this guy. Roth Taylor asks if she can run, and he'll help her. Let me tell you something, there's always a reason behind every goodwill and trust. Even the Elt store receptionist always acts as if he's flirting with Lortel because he hopes she'll provide some information. Katan, the mercantile employee, also gets very excited in front of Lortel because he always gets tips from her about something. The reason why the Academy bird clings so much to Lortel is that she always gives him the highest quality food. Lortel's world revolves around these twisted acts of kindness when they want something in return. So while running alongside replied Roth Taylor. The girl didn't understand the reason. The MC takes the opportunity to ask if she was betrayed by Alice. Distressed, Loratel couldn't stop thinking that it's her fault for all this. Janica Faylover grew up receiving love and kindness, and that's why she treats the world the same way. That day she saw Janica offer help to Ed Roth Taylor with a gentle and happy look, without wanting anything in return or greed, and that filled her with illusion, thinking she could feel that too. It was because she wanted to feel that too that she told her plans to Alice, thinking she could have that with her too. But that humiliated her feelings once again. Loratel stops and thinks she shouldn't have tried to push away her dark and filthy side. And how could someone like her live such a romantic life? To get to the Ophelis Hall, she bribed 5 people: head maid Alice, twin maids Shenny and Kelly, lower student representative Willis, and fallen noble Ed. The twins joined Elt, so did Willis. Alice betrayed her, and now she knows what to expect from Ed too. So she apologizes, stopping her walk and wondering why she's saying this to him. Why? Because he's an ally. She tells Ed that she can no longer pay the 20 gold coins she promised before. As he can see, the situation at the moment is unstable. Internally, Loratel wonders why she's saying smart things to someone who isn't even on her side. The sad and melancholic girl is startled to hear the words, "And I asked." Ed grabs her arm and pulls her while saying he doesn't have time. If Eld catches her, her life will be over. If she wants to plan things for the future, first they have to get out of here. I know you guys understand that. At this moment he pulls the girl from the dark corridor forward where it is illuminated. It's beautiful to see that at this moment Loratel managed to feel goodwill and trust coming from someone. The girl thinks about something she never had, but she's sure there's always a reason for these people. If you don't see the reason behind people, you don't trust them. Loratel is silent for a few seconds when Ed asks her to tell him what's going on. After thinking it over 1,000 times, she decides to tell. Loratel reveals that this is the work of her father. She quickly explains everything about what happened and her father's intentions to monopolize the armor market to make a lot of money urgently. Ulf found someone who would buy the sealed grimoire of the sage for a good price, and then he sent Loratel to Sylvania Academy to find a way to steal. Our villain, after interrupting quite a bit, says he understands everything and doesn't need her to explain the rest. In manipulative commerce, merchants monopolize a cheap product in the market and artificially increase its price to negotiate among themselves, a classic method still used today by retailers to manipulate their prices. As prices continuously rise, consumers think that product will soon be unavailable, making them feel the need to buy it now. And if such products gathered so far are sold at this exact moment, an absurd amount of money can be obtained. But for such price manipulation to work, trust between merchants is necessary, and if you sell a product without the knowledge of the other, the price will drop instantly, just like in the stock markets. Elt desperately sold his shares to buy armor in bulk to monopolize their prices and make a lot of money at the right time. Loretel's plan was to be in touch with other merchants for years and bribe them to put the armor on sale when Elt wasn't at the merchant's headquarters. And that's why she made this plan, to lure Elt and make him lose all his power due to sudden loss. It then says it worked. Elt came to the academy, so all she has to do is send the message to the merchants to set the price of the armor. Right. Loratel wonders how the hell he managed to understand everything at once. She tells everything about how she will send this message to the merchant's headquarters. A carrier pigeon in her room has the message. Loratel also thinks her father is waiting for this and intends to capture her here to make the internal traders confess the whole plan. Our villain, after hearing everything, asks Loratel to listen carefully. From now on, she must remain hidden until it's all over. It says that if he were Elt, he would put people watching the 2 bridges leaving the city. Loratel must talk to the knight in the quarters and send an empty carriage to the Arkan Mountains and hide it well. This will make the soldiers think she is hiding in the Arkan Mountains. Meanwhile, she must hide in her unfinished cabin in the forest for 3 days. Our villain says he will send the carrier pigeon in her place. It's at this moment that Roth Taylor realizes something and grabs the girl and throws her against the wall. Someone is watching the back door. He will run to her room and take care of the people outside. She waits here until the person leaves and then flees to the dormitory. He took care of the matters without wasting time. Ed's actions and words made Loratel think she could trust him with everything. While the waifu was mesmerized by this moment, Ed questioned if the girl is in her right mind because she was out of it. The Loratel he knows isn't careless like this. All of this happened so quickly, and it might even work, but the girl desperately wants to understand why he's helping so much. Our villain didn't expect such a question now. How can he convince this girl now? It simply says there's no reason. He just felt he should help her and walked out the door. After closing the door, Loratel hears the rain falling outside and hitting the floor inside. The sound of the rain was loud, but something was even louder. Battles were happening throughout the building, but none of these noises were as loud as something inside her. Inside her chest, a machine was beating so hard that she could feel her chest trembling. Maybe she had just experienced love. Outside, the maid Sheni commented that she didn't expect that person to come out, saying it was unexpected. This person had been mistreated all the way there. Our protagonist thought that everything was now heading towards its end. Taylor and his group were at that moment facing what would be their greatest enemy, using swords and everything they had. This enemy was the head maid of the Sylvania Academy, Alice. Although she was strong, she couldn't defeat the young first-year student. And do you know why? Because he is the main character of this story. This is the final act of the third arc between Taylor and the powerful maid, while the fight between the main characters is happening upstairs in another location, almost as if behind the curtains while the big theater show is happening. Our villain Rothstaler is facing one of the head maid's apprentices. Rothstaler had many encounters to get there and is already running low on mana, being able to cast only 2 to 3 basic spells. However, there is no time to think, as the maid is already rushing at our villain with only one intention: to chop Rufus into pieces. However, Rothstaler easily dodges the first attack, as he already knew she would aim at his leg. With this, he blocks the maid's attack, who lifts her skirt, revealing a series of mini knives. But before she can use the weapons, our villain is quicker, disarming her completely and immobilizing her. Maid Sheni is devastated, unable to believe the impressive moves of our protagonist. He then uses his last resort to win this fight, his sharing ability, which allows him to share one of his abilities with his twin sister once a day. Oh, I hadn't mentioned before, but this is not the maid who was the mini-boss while Taylor and the group were climbing the stairs. It's her twin sister. The ability the sister took is a low-rank ability, telekinesis. The twin sister goes all out in the direction of our protagonist, hitting him because he didn't have time to dodge. Her attack was well executed, but since it was a basic ability and not so strong, Rothstaler didn't need to dodge completely, as the attacks only made minor cuts. In the meantime, he takes advantage of the perfect moment to immobilize her, kicking her mini knives away, and finally saying that it's over now. Applying his final blow, the maid screams, pleads, and struggles, saying she can't fail Alice, now begging Rothstaler to leave. The villain only responds that Alice will lose. Sheni responds that he knows nothing about Alice, knows nothing about her pain, her responsibilities, her battles. Even blind in one eye and sick in body, she faces that group of people. Shen asked Rothstaler if he knows how many orphans the head maid Alice has saved, revealing that she is also one of those orphans. Rothstaler sincerely thinks that he really doesn't know much about Alice. His only knowledge is that she will be defeated by Taylor that day. He knows nothing about her past. The only thing he knows is that, through Taylor's forces, she will fall while bravely fighting against the main characters of this work for a dirty reason, but with the best intentions, like a mother who would do anything for her children, blind, literally and figuratively. While this happens behind the scenes, Rothstaler hears the lament of that poor daughter begging to save her mother. Indeed, he doesn't know about this. His only response is that it doesn't matter to him. Despite his harsh words to Sheni, he even sympathizes with her pain. Sheni, in her last seconds of life, says she will never forgive him for siding with Lortel, calling him by name and taking her last breath, accompanied by her mother, who also passes away. Rothstaler thinks he really knows nothing about their past, wondering what that something he should know it is. But in the end, these are stories that neither I, nor you, nor the protagonist himself will ever know what they are. While the fight continues, Rothstaler drags Sheni's body and leaves it in a certain spot in the Ophilis Hall. Without time to think, he departs as quickly as possible to fulfill his objective because, whether he likes it or not, he reincarnated in the body of a third-rate villain in this game, and his only option is to survive. With that, the system notifies Rothstaler, informing him that he incapacitated maid Sheni, and that changes will occur. To our villain's surprise, he gains a new ability, pain resistance, increasing his resistance to exhaustion and pain for a period of time. However, there is no time to think about this, so he leaves as quickly as possible to fulfill his duty. Entering Lortel's room, Rothstaler sees various luxurious decorations, papers, and books piled on her desk. That room is the place where Lortel lived for a long time. Next to the bookshelf is a cage with a carrier pigeon. Rothstaler writes a message to the merchant headquarters, asking them to sell all the armor in their stock. With that, the carrier pigeon flies away, also carrying the end of this art. Sometime later, wounded and struggling to walk, Rothstaler is in the mountains, thinking that while Elf fights against Jixu and Janica, he will not be able to capture Lortel. Lortel, by carriage, should have already reached the mountains, and the carrier pigeon has already departed carrying the resolution of everything. Everything went according to plan. Now, Lortel just has to wait, and everything will be fine. But something catches the villain's attention. Lortel herself walks up to him, places placing her hand on her waist. This act makes Roth Sailor think of the possibility that, whether he likes it or not, the person in front of him is a villain, none other than the Golden Daughter, Loratel. This is the perfect setting to eliminate evidence, as only Roth Sailor knows her secrets. Loratel is a secret villain who controls everyone behind the scenes with her own hands, a true villain. Roth Sailor desperately thinks about what he can do to survive, but his body is already exhausted. Before he realizes it, Loratel is already in front of him, about to attack with a knife. To the villain's surprise, she uses the knife to cut his clothes and treat his wounds, asking why he had to hurt himself so much. Roth Sailor cannot understand what just happened. Loratel helps Roth Sailor walk to the cabin, heading to the fireplace. With teary eyes and a blush, she suggests they warm up together. Finally, they snuggle near the fire, talking about how everything turned out well. Loratel draws Roth Sailor's attention, saying she now owes him a great debt, asking what he thinks about that, and if he doesn't find it amazing to have such a debt with someone like her. Roth Sailor just ignores Loratel's flirtation, inflating his ego, and makes a light joke. He smiles and thanks her, saying he will never forget this. The protagonist asks for 20 gold coins to settle the debt, which makes Loratel smile slightly. However, the atmosphere changes suddenly when Loratel asks about Janica. Roth Sailor responds that yes, he and Janica are very close and that she is a great person. Loratel replies that yes, she agrees that Janica is a great person, a great classmate, and a respectful person with a big heart, always considering everyone around her. Roth Sailor asks about the sudden change of topic, and Loratel remains silent for a few seconds before responding that she is not a good person. I think she has villainous intentions towards our protagonist. Elsewhere, at the same time, Ult received a report from his subordinates and left the academy as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Jigsaw observes the situation, seeing the henchmen being made into cat's pawns by Janica. He asks Janica to stop her attack, but it seems this will not be the case. Jigsaw asks Janica if she is angry, while one of her spirits whispers something to her. After hearing this, Janica responds that she is not angry at all. I don't know which girl I like more, folks. Tell me, Janica or Loratel. With the end of the arc, that guy took the blame for all the attacks that occurred during the assault. Alice was taken to trial as the head of all these attacks, but throughout the trial, she didn't even open her mouth. Loratel, the most important character in this scenario, is now alongside Roth Sailor, hiding in the mountains. After all this headache, Roth Sailor gives a big sigh, as now it's time to rest. His abilities have also increased, unlocking 2 slots for advanced techniques. He wonders which abilities to use, thinking of spiritual infusion that increases his compatibility with spirits and magic engine, facilitating his daily needs. The combination of these 2 abilities will allow him to produce magical weapons. However, his thoughts are interrupted by Janica, who asks if he is okay. Roth Sailor asks if she didn't go to the academy, and she responds that she had a headache but took some time to rest. Conversation goes, conversation comes. Janica asks if Loratel is okay, and Roth Sailor just responds that yes, she is resting in her cabin, and I think that answer didn't please Janica. After all the tense situation, Loratel can finally breathe a sigh of relief, feeling the sun on her skin. She will have to wait 3 days after all that happened, and is now awaiting the merchant's responses. He has spent every night hiding in a small and cozy cabin in the forest. This whole situation is frustrating, but Loratel doesn't feel too bad, as she can see the cultivated and toned muscles of Roth Sailor while he acts like a lumberjack and catches her attention. Loratel loves being by the protagonist's side because for her, who lived distant from her own feelings, value only money, this moment has immeasurable value. However, all this mushy scene between Roth Sailor and Janica makes Loratel a bit nervous. Loratel, determined to play dirty in the game of love, plans to fill the small cabin with gold coins to catch Roth Sailor's attention, but she realizes this won't work because he is not impressed with money. Loratel thinks about trying to catch his attention with typical Tsundere phrases, but finds everything very embarrassing, as she spent her whole life focused on money and doesn't know how to interact with people. While thinking, someone calls her asking to move. It's Lucy, the little sleepyhead who had been missing. Lucy, full of sleep, arrives to take her afternoon nap. Roth Sailor picks up Lucy and puts her in the little house in the backyard, asking Loratel if she is okay and if she woke up well. Loratel observes the situation and wonders if Lucy always visits the cabin, realizing that there is another rival girl for the villain's heart. On the second morning during the retreat in the mountains, Loratel wakes up with a big smile and greets her visitor. Janica, despite the apparent smile, Janica has other thoughts, almost as if saying, "Stay away from my man." Lortel and Janica will have to endure this situation because Rothstaler is quite popular. While the protagonist works on building a brick for his fireplace, he decides it's time for lunch. During the lunch meeting, Lortel says she will pay Rothstaler for all the accommodation he is offering. The protagonist thinks about what she can give in return, and in the meantime, Janica watches these two, clearly jealous. Rothstaler unexpectedly asks Janica for a favor she is experienced in this area. Janica explains how to establish a contract with spirits, leaving Rothstaler surprised. A spirit reveals some confidential things about Janica, reveals that it was in charge of watching Ed before. She asked if he heard everything, and unfortunately for the girl, she was exposed. Lortel, noticing the tension, interrupts the conversation and tells Rothstaler that she will sell magical devices at a good price if he spends some time with her. Janica gets irritated and the two have a slight argument. Lortel wants Ed to spend more time with her, but Janica is determined not to lose space and fights for his attention too. Rothstaler, for his part, just watches the two and remains focused on his own goals, a true Sigma. A new person arrives at the scene, surprising everyone with their presence and interrupting the argument between Janica and Lortel. To everyone's surprise, this person is Belle Maya, the new head maid, who came to apologize for all the past events. She also brings a message from the former head maid Alice. But before this confusion, let's go back a few days when Janica's friend went to Maya to gossip about a certain topic. Janica had a crush on Ed Rothstaler, the third-rate villain. For Maya, this was no surprise, as she already sensed these things. She listened to everything Janica's friend had to say, but the real reason for the visit was to talk about a meeting between Janica and her friends. During that meeting, it was mentioned that Lortel was interested in Rothstaler. Maya didn't believe that someone with such a strong personality as Lortel would fall for Rothstaler until she saw the scene of Lortel smiling and Janica looking worried. Lortel asked Maya the reason for her visit, and Maya replied that she came to deliver a message from the former head maid Alice, who had betrayed Lortel. Later, at night, Maya and Lucy left the cabin, making it clear that a certain person was not happy about this situation. The winter uniforms were delivered to the students, and the final resolution of Lortel's arc came with the confirmation of equipment sales. The authority of Elt, Lortel's adoptive father, was revoked, and Lortel's position increased. Rothstaler asked Lortel about the chance of another attack from Elt, and she replied that it was almost zero. She then talked about Alice's situation, explaining that Alice worked hard to sponsor orphanages, to the point of self-destruction to care for the children. Eventually, she could no longer continue, and gave her all for the plan, blindly followed by her maids. Lortel understood the reasons for Alice's betrayal, but in the mercantile world, sympathy doesn't exist, and any slip could be costly. Rothstaler gave Lortel a new perspective, asking her not to expose everything that happened behind the occupation of Awfulus Hall. Lortel smiled, keeping the letter she was carrying, and said that no one would know about the occupation. At the end of the retreat, Lortel prepared to leave, but before going, Ed gave her a torch and asked her to be careful. Lortel looked at him silently, surprised by Rothstaler's words, and commented that he seemed stronger. She adjusted his tie affectionately and said that he was still a simple student at Sylvania Academy. Pulling Rothstaler's collar, she gave him a passionate kiss, saying that he was becoming an attractive man, which caught the attention of other girls. Lortel thanked Rothstaler for his hospitality and told him to dream of her. Rothstaler, embarrassed, asked what she was talking about, and Lortel confidently replied that since he was so popular, she would make sure he was hers alone. She then said goodbye, stumbling and trying to hide her embarrassment, while Rothstaler watched her leave. Lortel's seductive skills were effective, and that night Rothstaler didn't sleep. Interpret that as you will. A while later, he reflected on everything that happened. He realized that his original plan of living a peaceful life without ambitions now seemed ridiculous and far from reality. With the arrival of autumn, in a certain tree in the middle of that beautiful forest, a girl surrounded by her spirits was alerted about a certain kiss between certain people, saying that she couldn't let things stay like this. She had already been warned that a certain person had a sweet and passionate kiss, and that the fox who stole the kiss knew well how to win people over. The girl, red with anger, asked what Rothstaler's reaction was after the kiss. Despite the hot kiss, Rothstaler's reaction was cold, which left her somewhat relieved, but her spirits encouraged her to go on the offensive, saying she shouldn't just feel relieved. Meanwhile, our villain was feeding his pet, Lucy, spicy food, which was cruel. He was training his skills and expanding the ingredients he could use, gradually increasing his status and dexterity. However, the biggest problem now was the lack of time, as with the start of classes, the time he had to develop his inventions was scarce. He used his time efficiently for his survival activities and to check the progress of future scenarios. Taylor was already part of the combat department, accompanied by his childhood friend, Princess Princess Fiona, both progressing well, but soon they would have a discussion with Lortel. Rothstaler was also keeping an eye on Lortel's situation, who was smitten with him, but now there was something more important to check. The next boss, Professor Glass, and he was having a meeting with his assistant Claire Elf. The girl came to say that there was something hidden about the attack on Ophelis Hall, and that there was another mind behind it. Glass, irritated, slammed the table and said he didn't want to hear theories and that she should find the culprit in 24 hours. She tried hard, and with all this responsibility on her shoulders, she found nothing, but upon checking the documents about that night many times, something caught the woman's attention, something strange about Ed Rothstaler. Then we return to our villain, who was talking to Lortel about promised magical devices. Lortel used all her charm to seduce him, but Rothstaler didn't pay much attention, which left her a bit frustrated, so she changed the subject and asked about his cabin, if it was ready. He said it was still missing a bit because things were a bit expensive for him. The girl didn't joke around when it came to money, and with that done, she climbed on the table and used all her beauty. Lortel asked if he liked the kiss from that day and said she saw him as a man wanting to use him. She said her help was for selfish reasons and that when she entered a battle, she entered to win. She admitted that she might not be able to contain herself and might attack him again. Lortel tried to maintain the appearance of a born negotiator but was embarrassed by her own advances. Later, Janica, super excited about Rufus' classes, advised him to focus on his magic and form a spiritual connection. Rothstaler made a summoning and established a connection with a low-rank spirit called Mug. The little Mug was motivated to serve Rothstaler. Janica explained that by establishing a connection with the spirit, he could feel his magical and physical power, even when not manifested. She asked Ed to be careful, as a very strong connection could increase the flames of the spirits or their respective elements. Ed asked if by controlling the level of connection, his offensive capacity could be increased, which made Janica a bit embarrassed, as it made it seem like Little Mug was a firearm. Looking at Rothstaler's reaction while observing his small spirit, it's clear that he will use this spirit as a household appliance, as it will be his automatic heater. The connection with the low-rank spirit was established. For those in doubt, here are the little spirit's stats. While Rothstaler is excited about his new appliance, Janica comments that she is happy to see him content, as he always seems exhausted. She says that if he needs help, he shouldn't hesitate to ask. Janica wants to ensure that Rothstaler doesn't go after another girl, hinting that she is better than Lortel. Janica tries to say that she is a busy person and can help Rothstaler all the time, but her words come out wrong, and she said she wanted compensation for it. Ed offers to pay with coins, even though he doesn't have many. Janica timidly replies that this was advice from a friend, says that he needs the money to survive and that paying for help with money is cold. Ed, confused, asks what's wrong, and Janica admits that her kindness is not for everyone, it is reserved only for a specific person. That's what she meant. After saying goodbye, Ed returns to his cabin, now equipped with new magical devices, some given by Lortel and others made by himself. His cabin is becoming more and more comfortable, a great progress for someone who once slept in the middle of the forest. Meanwhile, Claire, still pondering the attack on Ophelis Hall, is certain that there is a mastermind in the shadows behind the attacks. She is particularly intrigued by Ed, who was expelled from his dormitories. Determined to investigate him, Claire goes to the north of the forest. In the middle of the night, Claire sees someone carrying the body of a girl and a slain animal. Frightened, she recognizes the girl as Lucy, who is unconscious. Claire is certain that even the headmaster of Sylvania Academy would have to use all his power against that girl, and she is in the arms of that girl. She is sure Rothstaler is involved with the Academy attack. She tried to free the girl Lucy, but when she tried to approach, the girl was quicker than lightning and stared at the teacher, asking who was invading her space. Realizing it was the teacher, she returned to her captivity, grabbed her meat, and fiercely stared at the teacher like someone who wanted to steal her food, then left. Claire, witnessing all this, didn't fully understand things, but went as quickly as possible to Glass' office and questioned if he remembered that noble who became trash, Ed Rothstaler. The teacher is sure he is the planner of the Ophelis Hall attack. However, the professor is not interested in useless trash. She insists that this is not true, and he even defeated Lucy in combat and left her unconscious. She also investigated and used her magic to see the memories of the students who were there and fought against Rothstaler, and he can see this ball. Professor Glass doesn't believe the girl and only questions if Ed wasn't just carrying Lucy sleeping around. After thinking for a bit, she decides to give up and will write an apology letter to the professor. All this seemed obvious to Glass, but something in the students' memories was not normal. Trash like Rothstaler shouldn't be able to defeat 3 people more powerful than him, and together, there really is something wrong with this student, the professor realizes. Great explosions occur in the forest when the villain uses his ceremonial dagger, imbued with the magical formula of the low-rank spirit. Mug, Rothstaler, proud of his skills, has engraved this formula on the dagger. Mug mentions that the more the dagger is used, the more efficient it will become due to the engraved formula. This makes Rothstaler a bit embarrassed. Roths, noticing Mug's excessive formality, asks him to act more relaxed. He knows that the stronger his connection with his spiritual bond, the more powerful he will become, like Janica, who treats all her spirits as great friends. Rothstaler asks Mug what's good about being by his side, and if Janica promised something to the little spirit. Under pressure, Mug starts to cry, explaining that he isn't hiding anything and that he is loyal to Ed. Mug is happy to have a contract with Ed and to receive refined magic from Janica, which makes him grow. Rothstaler sighs and asks Mug to be honest about his feelings. The spirit then reveals that he heard rumors at the academy that Ed was authoritarian, and that's why he acted so formally. After clarifying things, the connection between Ed and Mug strengthens. Rothstaler is progressing both in skills and in physical strength and endurance. His food supply is well stocked, and he no longer needs to sleep outdoors. He finds it easy to memorize his subjects, studying and reviewing every night before bed. This constant effort, though difficult, is not unpleasant for Rothstaler. One night, while studying, Ed is interrupted by Janica, concerned, asking what's wrong. He responds that he was just distracted, and Janica asks him not to push himself too hard and to take care of his health. A few hours earlier, Rothstaler had received 3 different letters, one from the academy, another from the merchants, and the third of utmost importance. The third letter, which needs to be read carefully, reveals that the main story has been distorted. In the second act of the story, the sale of the sealed grimoire sparked a war between the Merchant Center and Sylvania Academy. However, with Elt's downfall, another person got involved, a relative of Rothstaler, interested in buying the sealed grimoire to gain eternal life. This relative, the patriarch of the Rothstaler family, is a strong boss who should appear only in the 4th act. If he gets the grimoire, his strength will be immense. The letter specifies suspicious actions of Crepin Rothstaler and is an invitation for Ed to discuss these matters. In another location, Fiona, the sender of the letter, reflects on the financial situation of Sylvania Academy. Being a private academy, it cannot provide financial support, facilitating the purchase of the grimoire by the Merchant Center. The academy's director asks Fiona for help, but she suspects how Crepin, Ed's father, is aware of these negotiations. One of the guards raises the hypothesis that Ed is reporting everything to his father, but a distant voice, belonging to Lortel, questions this assumption and asks for Fiona's attention. The princess doesn't see how this can be reasonable as far as she knows. Lortel hated her. Lortel responds that this is a very unfair accusation, as she would never hate the beloved, beautiful, and dazzling Princess Fiona. Anyway, Lortel is there to explain that Crepin's involvement must have been due to Elt, her father, and not by Ed himself. This catches the princess's full attention, as Crepin only got involved in all this due to the failure of her biological father's plan during the grimoire purchase, resorting to this only option. However, it is still very strange to Fiona, as at first, it seemed that the Rothstaler family and the Kelchin family were together during the grimoire purchase, but now they are competing against each other. Although Fiona doesn't want to sell the grimoire, this is great news for Lortel. Our red-headed villain says that the enemy of my enemy is my best friend. Lortel says that this way she would be holding the reins of the Rothstaler family and managing to obtain the grimoire. Additionally, Lortel makes it clear that her main reason is not wanting to see Ed hurt, which leaves Fiona even more confused. Lortel explains that Ed was expelled from his family, and it would be unfair to associate him with this situation. Fiona, surprised, responds that Ed Rothstaler is definitely very useful for this situation, implying that she will threaten Ed. In another place, Fiona, the author of the letter, pondered over the financial situation of Sylvania Academy. Being a private academy, it could not provide financial support, facilitating the purchase of the grimoire by the Mercantile Center. The academy's director asked Fiona for help, but she suspected how Crepin Rothstaler was aware of these negotiations. One of the guards suggested that Ed Rothstaler might be reporting everything to his father, but a distant voice, belonging to Lortel, questioned this assumption and requested a minute of Fiona's attention. Princess Fiona saw no reason for Lortel to be there, as far as she knew. Lortel hated her. Our red-haired waifu responded that this was a very unfair accusation, as she would never hate the beloved, beautiful, and dazzling Princess Fiona. Anyway, Lortel was there to explain that Crepin's involvement was likely due to her father, Elt, and not Ed himself. This caught the princess's full attention, as Crepin only got involved because of the failure of Lortel's father's plan during the grimoire purchase. However, it still seemed very strange to Fiona, as initially, it appeared that the Rothstaler family and the Kelchin family were cooperating to buy the grimoire, but now they were competing against each other. Loretel said she did not want to sell the grimoire to Crepin. After buying it, she had no interest in having connections with the businesses Elta used to conduct. Our redheaded said she was only telling this because if Fiona bought the grimoire, it would be advantageous for both of them. Additionally, Loretel made it clear that her primary motive was not wanting to see Ed get hurt even more, which left Fiona even more confused. Why would she care about anyone besides herself? Loretel explained that Ed was expelled from his family, and it would be unfair to associate him with this situation. Surprised, Fiona responded that Ed Rothstaler was definitely very useful for this situation. She could use her influence over him and even threaten him. Indignant, Loretel asked what Fiona really intended to do with Ed. The princess, undeterred, said she had no choice but to use Ed. Loretel, trying to contain herself but failing, started laughing and questioned who would really use whom. Fiona's guard tried to intervene, but Fiona stopped him. With a villainous look, Loretel gave sincere advice to the princess. Don't try to use Ed because in the end, it would be Fiona herself who would be used. The guard was angry with these words, but Fiona told him to be quiet. Fiona was confused by this whole situation. After that, she went to meet our protagonist and noticed that Ed was not in good health. She entered into a discussion with Janica and lost, feeling embarrassed. Loretel asked about the magic devices and received the response that they were all there. More exchanges of barbs occurred, with Loretel winning this time, making it 1-to-1 between the girls. Ed said he couldn't accept these gifts, and she replied that it wasn't a problem. Loretel used the most unfair weapon in this fight, the power of money. During this exchange of barbs, Ed wasn't feeling well, with a familiar sense of exhaustion and heaviness in his body. He needed to prepare to face his father and take care of his cabin, food stock, firewood, and also Lucy, his little companion. All this weighed on his body, and the girl's concern was obvious. Elsewhere at Sylvania Academy, Fiona thought about Ed. She knew that Ed's reputation had changed significantly but needed to be sure of something. Therefore, she sent a letter ordering him to visit her residence, asking her guard if everything was ready for Ed's visit the next day. Fiona received the news that this wouldn't be possible because Ed was in poor health due to physical exhaustion. Our villainous protagonist wakes up slowly, feeling his body heavy, but not due to his illness. It is because our tiny Lucy has made Ed her mattress. Poor Ed, there's a compact human sleeping on him and mumbling a few things. He doesn't understand what is happening and asks, "What the hell is that? How can she be sleeping like that on a sick person?" But there's something strange. Although Lucy is small and light, Ed can't move, which makes him think something is wrong with his body. At this moment, our little one wakes up, still half asleep and hungry. Before Ed can say anything, she casts a spell, stabilizing his mana and telling him that his mana is completely distorted. She explains that he has been training his magic and spiritual refinement too much, and that's why he ended up like this. Our villain asks if she has been doing this for the past few days, and she replies that she has because it's not that hard, but it's annoying. That's why she was sleeping there, saying that, thanks to certain people, she has been walking on eggshells. Given the situation, it's understandable. To Ed's surprise, our little Lucy asks him not to get sick, saying that sick people can die. These words carry a certain pain because it was on a sick like this that Lucy lost a loved one, her grandfather. But that's a story for another time because another person arrives at the scene. This person is his friend Jixu with a new look. He stops thinking when he sees that scene, and the little one grabs her hat and flees as fast as she can, like a bolt of lightning. Jixu doesn't quite understand the situation and asks our human how many times he does this. Talking to himself, he says it's normal for strong people to have more than 1 or 2 partners, if you know what I mean, but Ed interrupts him, asking what he is doing there. He responds that both Janica and Loretel had to leave, and that's exactly why he is there, helping Rufus, who, well, isn't the best help, but it's help nonetheless. Jixu is there to help Ed on Loretel's orders because she said no fooling around. So that's it, that's why he is there. Despite being sick, our friend is still concerned about the story's progress and asks Jixu about the Mandrake attack. That problem has already been resolved, a problem created by Alvera and solved by Taylor and his group, which is also one of the game's scenarios. He also asked about another scenario, which thanks to Taylor and Jixu, has already been resolved. One less thing to worry about, but there is still a bigger concern. Ed asked how long he has been unconscious, and to his surprise, it has been exactly 2 weeks. Jixu wasn't aware of this, but he continues saying that everyone was happy Ed woke up. However, our villain is worried about a certain matter and calls Jixu, saying he needs to quickly send a message to Loretel, thinking to himself that he is running out of time. The next day, after Ed wakes up, the fight for the sealed grimoire begins. This is the 10th scenario. The involved parties are Princess Fiona, the representative of the Mercantile Guild, our dear Loretel, and the man who has deviated from the original storyline. The patriarch of the Rothstaler Duchy, Ed's father and Lortel's future father-in-law. He is the final boss of the 4th act of this game. At Sylvania Academy, our adorable Fiona, while cutting meat, heard words from a certain person who was happy to be well and apologized for the delay and lack of cordiality. This person explained that, due to another person in their family, Fiona had certain problems, and by her order, this person was exiled from the family. Fiona responded seriously that everything was fine now and that there was no need to worry. This person, with a gentle smile while enjoying the meat, was Crippen, Ed Rothstaler's father. Fiona, standing before him, thought that he had the same blood as Ed Rothstaler, a noble, wise duke of his family. By Crippen's simple actions, it was possible to see the respect his servants had for him. However, despite this noble and respectful image, Fiona noticed that he was clearly malicious. Crippen asked about Lortel, who had been silent until then. Lortel introduced herself cordially, stating her name and expressing that it was an honor to be in his presence. She said that as an exquisite Kelchin, where there is profit, she would be there, as her family follows the scent of money. She smiled, trying to gain favor with her future father-in-law, but Crippen responded dryly with a simple, "I understand." The negotiations for the sealed grimoire began, with the same 2 buyers previously presented. The highest bidder would take home Sylvania Academy's treasure, in a secret negotiation to avoid exposing the Academy's financial difficulties. Fiona would be beside the Academy's vice principal as an observer, along with the procurator who would conduct the auction silently. At this moment, the highest bidder would win the prize in a direct confrontation between Lortel and Crippen Rothstaler. Not being very involved in the world of negotiations, Fiona researched a lot about negotiation methods in some books like the Book of Order, the Book of Similarity, and the Magical Diary of Travels. She studied intrinsic magical values, academic values such as research subjects, and the value of lust, all these aspects permeating the world of negotiations. Fiona, while looking at Lortel, thought that she probably already knew all this. From Lortel's look, it was clear that she already had the knowledge of thousands of similar books. However, Lortel's opponent was none other than the powerful Crippen. He was probably the one who would take the grimoire home. The vice principal received the values from each one, thanking them for their participation. Fiona knew that the key during this auction was to discover the maximum bid of her opponent. During Crippen's presentation, hours earlier, Lortel had made it clear that all she wanted was profit, and therefore, if necessary, her bid would be around 8,100 coins to ensure profit on resale. Fiona said that any value above that would result in a loss for Lortel, which meant that if Crippen's bid was higher than 8,000 coins, the grimoire would be his. The vice principal announced the bid values. Crippen offered 8,500 coins. Fiona had expected exactly this amount, as Crippen had shown his interest in the grimoire. To Fiona's surprise, Lortel announced a bid of 9,400 coins. Knowing well the art of cunning, Lortel emerged victorious, leaving Crippen irritated and leaving the place quickly. Fiona is confused, thinking that perhaps this was Lortel's goal from the beginning, to buy the grimoire to prevent it from falling into the wrong hand. Fiona doubts Lortel's intentions, as she is not known for acting out of justice. The only explanation is that Lortel acted under the command of someone who knows Crippen's malicious nature well and wants to stop him at any cost. Remembering Lortel's smile, Fiona thinks of a certain someone who has no affiliation with her family, who was expelled from his quarters, had his name revoked, lived by his own determination, and collapsed from overwork, fighting against the darkness of his family until the end. This person is none other than Ed, our beloved villain protagonist. Fiona, barely able to stand, feels the weight of guilt. She thinks that because of her, a noble person like Ed was brought to ruin, but this is just a misunderstanding. It only wants to live well and in peace. Meanwhile, Lortel reflects that even by reselling the grimoire, Crippen will profit since she bought it for 9,400 coins. The talk of not reselling the grimoire was just a lie from Crippen, a shrewd merchant. Lortel receives a letter from Ed, who knows well how to stir her mercantile heart. Lortel paid 900 gold coins, more than the profitable amount for her due to the grimoire's value being 8,500 coins. She says that this extra cost was worth it, as it was the price to have a free pass to Ed's heart, since it was he who asked her to buy the grimoire, regardless of whether she would sell it later. Crippen could not emerge victorious there. The red-haired waifu tells herself that this is something valuable to her. After the grimoire purchase, a few days pass. Sitting by a campfire, Ed and Jixu were talking, with Jixu mentioning that when he delivered the letter to Lortel, she was very happy. Although Ed knows that Lortel is interested in him, he used this to make her buy the grimeware. Even feeling a bit guilty for using Lortel, Ed knows he needs to do everything he can to gather information. A loud noise from the forest interrupts his thoughts. Janica appears, having skipped class to see and take care of Ed. He apologizes for worrying her, saying that he caused various problems for her. Janica quickly responds that it was nothing, but Jigsaw reveals that Janica was walking around the academy in tears, generating rumors that her heart was broken. Her reaction confirms this to be true. To avoid further embarrassment, Janica sends Jigsaw away. Mug is also worried about Ed, saying that he could die due to his reckless action. Jigsaw mentions that Ed was unconscious for 10 days, causing his meat stock to spoil and his fishing nets to break. Even though he is exhausted, Ed says he needs to survive and cannot rest. However, when asked if he plans to overwork himself again, Janica and Jigsaw insist that he accept their help. Ed is surprised by their willingness to help him and do all the heavy lifting in his place. He realizes that although he is exhausted, he now has friends he can rely on. Not long ago, when he was still under that simple vine hut with not a penny in his pocket, sleeping only accompanied by darkness with no one he could trust, that was in the past. It was not long ago, but these two reliable faces made him forget what it felt like to be alone. While Janica talks to the wolf, she receives advice. She should take advantage of the fact that the red-haired fox is occupied to gain an advantage in Ed's heart. The wolf says that Lortel is smart and malicious, and Janica needs to learn to be more strategic like her. The first step is to change her appearance to attract more attention from Ed. Despite feeling embarrassed by the wolf's suggestion, Janica thinks it over and finds it a great idea. Her spirit says that it's not enough to just be beautiful. She needs to go to him and be willing to take action with that boy. After receiving a sermon on how she is not doing everything she can, Janica explains to her wolf her seduction strategy. At night, Janica prepares a delicious stew for Ed, which he appreciates very much. With all the help around him, Ed knows that the least he can do is recover and be well. As he lies down, something catches his attention. Someone comes to him, saying he looks very tired. Prepare your hearts. Janica appears at the door with a smile that women use to defeat any man. Janica says that he shouldn't pretend everything is okay and that he isn't going through a difficult time. She says that exhaustion affects everyone equally, both physically and mentally, and she knows how hard he has worked to improve his life. She shares that when she was in her most difficult moment, many people helped her, but only one person made her rise from rock bottom by staying by her side. Using the same words Ed used when she was in that situation, she says that it's okay now and that he did his best. Despite Ed trying to say that she doesn't need to exert herself so much, she interrupts him, insisting that he must accept her help. With a slight sigh, Ed finally accepts that he has people he can count on and that he worked hard to get here. He falls asleep, feeling the best support a person can have by his side, the company of a beautiful girl. The night passes and a new day dawns. Ed wakes up feeling better from his exhaustion. Next to him, what catches his attention is the person who has been taking care of him non-stop. Seeing this girl here makes him so happy that it was impossible to contain his smile. He is fully healed and rejuvenated. In the past few days, Ed has made significant progress in his skills, especially in production research and magical engineering, becoming more versatile in his skills. However, there is a clear limit to what he can do, as most of the recipes for magical devices are given as rewards after certain scenarios. Since he doesn't want to get too involved in these scenarios, it becomes difficult for him to obtain such recipes. Observing Ed's progress, it became clear that he was not very interested in magical devices. Even with the recipes, he couldn't produce such devices immediately, as specific materials were needed. However, Ed's situation was a bit different, since he had someone by his side who could get him any material he needed, even from the other side of the world. That person was Lortel Kelchin. She came to Ed, expressing her happiness that he was well, and mentioned that she also needed some advice. With her adoptive father out of the picture, she had to change the name of her company and restructure her entire business. For this reason, she needed someone by her side to help with financial management, assets, product flow, and external affairs. To Ed's surprise, what she really wanted was an executive by her side, and who would be more perfect for this position than him? Lortel, already hinting at her intentions, suggested that after graduation they could work together. She insinuated that he could have an important role in her company, not just professionally, but also personally. However, to Lortel's surprise, Ed responded that it was a bit strange for her to go so far just to help him, but he understood her intentions. In a shy voice, Lortel said she knew how Ed felt, as he must be thinking that there was something wrong with her. She believed that Ed wanted to maintain professional professionalism until the end. Although Ed coldly responded that it wasn't quite like that, it was exactly what he wanted. However, because of her, after a lifetime in a world where money is the most important thing, and where you are betrayed if you do not betray first, she spoke with conviction that the most important thing is to have someone by your side who will never betray you, someone who will stay with you even after losing all your wealth, someone who, even if the world turns its back on you, will remain by your side. Ed understood Loratel's words. They applied to family, a lover, or even friends. For Loratel, who lived in an environment where only money mattered, Ed understood that she lived in constant fear that something might happen. Loratel then expressed that she just wanted Ed to stay by her side. Our villain was surprised by Loratel's words. Despite all this sappy scene, he almost fell for her act as she was using all her negotiation and seduction skills. Loratel did ask something of Ed, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Due to the situation and the silence, Ed understood well what she meant. Therefore, he said he intended to graduate from the academy first and had no intention of leaving school. With these words, she agreed and said that after his graduation, they could talk again. Loratel suggested that after graduation he could soon use this free pass, if he understood. With a beautiful smile, she said it was great to see Ed after such a long time. As the villain waifu left, Ed sighed and thought he might have done something terrible and worried about what could happen in the future, feeling indebted to her, and Loratel, in turn, thought to herself that she almost made a mistake, as her words to Ed were almost like saying, "You belong to me now." She'd had planned to say that, but seeing his face and state, she changed her mind. If she stayed longer, he would see her true intention. However, she left too early because she still had devices to deliver to him, but she felt a bit awkward returning given the situation. With this thought, she decided to leave the devices in his cabin. Meanwhile, Janica, who had just woken up, thought she should prepare a snack for her beloved Ed. In this context, various misunderstandings arose. Loratel questioned why Janica left the cabin so early, and Janica questioned why Loratel was coming from where Ed was bathing. This marked the beginning of a new scenario of competition for Ed's heart. Ed Rothtailor, who had already returned to his survival routine, was accompanied by Mug, who advised him not to overwork himself. Despite Mug's concern, Ed only apologized. Thanks to Jixu and Janica, he had enough food and firewood, and thanks to Loratel, he had enough money to furnish his cabin. What worried him most now were 3 letters he received before collapsing from exhaustion, one from Loratel, another from Princess Fiona regarding his father, and the last from the academy without a sender. Ed knew who sent the letter: Professor Glast, who wanted to have a private conversation with him. Due to exhaustion issues, this conversation didn't happen, so Ed didn't know why he was called. Given that Professor Glast would be the final boss of the second act, and it had already begun, Ed recalled that Glast always believed that people with talent had the power to change the world. To revive Sylvania, a great sage, Glast researched various magics that distorted natural laws. To complete the magic, he needed the sealed grimoire, which the Academy sold to Loratel. In desperation, Glast stole the grimoire and attempted to inject the spirit of Sylvania into his childhood friend, who was born with such magic that distorted natural laws. This is Glast's story, a narrative of a madman. According to the game, fortunately, Taylor and his group managed to save their friend, breaking Glast's traps. After being defeated, Glast made an abrupt declaration before falling from the top of the magic tower. Despite dreaming of academic advancement and individual talents, this was his final act, and without remembering his last words, our protagonist's knowledge goes up to here. However, the final battle of the second act, The Beginning of the War and Conquest, is a book that changes the properties of the sealed grimoire into a connection formula that begins with the kidnapping of childhood friend Ayla by Professor Glast. In the presence of a great demon and the culprit of the kidnapping, Ayla screams, saying it's his fault and that she hates him from the bottom of her heart. Ed Rothtailor, once again dragged into the center of conflict, but this time he says he is not to blame for anything. He was also kidnapped just like her. Our protagonist, Ed, was captured by the professor for some reason. Before we get into that, we need to vote. 3 days ago, while he was quietly living his life, having finished all his tasks related to food, etc., he thought to himself that Professor Glast's plot was about to begin. Despite feeling a bit embarrassed for not increasing any of his magical engineering stats, while reflecting on his training, Ed had a slight idea. He only thought drastically about how to raise his stats, but didn't remember that during the Professor Glast arc, there are 4 stages of battles. The hardest is in Stage 3, in the secret lab. The boss of this stage is the spiritual librarian Reina, a spirit so strong that it's almost impossible to get through this stage without the holy form of the story's protagonist Taylor's sword. However, this is not a problem for Ed to solve, but for Taylor and his group, as Ed's interest in this stage is the library's content, which contains valuable magical engineering recipes, including even 2 legendary recipes. Still, it remains dangerous, according to our dear villain. villain. Looking at a certain person, perfect, spectacular, slender, and beautiful, Ed thinks that everything will be fine if he's not alone, having the adorable Janica as a bodyguard. Now, let's go straight to the academy, where Professor Glass is speaking. It should be noted that at this moment, Ayla from Class C will be transferred to Class A. See how this girl is a great and cute student. Thanks to the professor's announcement, a person stands up to speak, Jix. He asked if just being talented is enough to enter Class A, arguing that this criterion is wrong, as there are also those who strive. Professor Glass asked Jix if, in his view, his decision is to ruin or tarnish the image of other students. Jix's only response is silence. The professor concludes by saying that the easiest way to ruin someone's life is by inflating their confidence with vague talents and inadequate support. Our investigator Lortel, before entering the academy, checked certain matters about Professor Glass. She discovered that his obsession with talents is likely due to his daughter, a mid-level mage named Maria. He had infinite faith in her, which led her to join a group of monsters prematurely, resulting in her death. Since then, Professor Glass has devoted himself to his spectral magic research. Knowing the professor's past, Lortel deduces that the only reason Ayla is called to Class A is this. Folks, this shows how this redhead is as smart as she is greedy. She discovered everything with so little information. I'm in love. Interrupting her thoughts, the professor calls for Lortel but changes his mind and says it's nothing. He'll talk to her later. Proving her superior intelligence, Lortel is sure it's about the grimoire. But regardless of what the professor says, that grimoire will stay with her, as it's what will give her access to the naked body of a third-rate villain she fell in love with. Let's get to the classes. Ed is thinking about the sealed grimoire that will soon be handed to Lortel and the attack Professor Glass plans during the grimoire handover ceremony. He plans to follow Taylor while he clears the scenarios to save his childhood friend Ayla, and then he'll grab magical engineering recipes in the spiritual library. The items were Glock's Eyes, temporarily increase your proficiency and affinity with mana. Delheim Hourglass, coats all physical states for a few seconds. Although these items don't have the most impressive effects, due to the difficulty of obtaining the materials, they can only be made during this scenario. Therefore, Ed thought, I'll get them all. While he's there, Ed could check or admire Taylor's progress during the scenario. Ed knew well that the scenario where Professor Glass would act would be during the sealed grimoire handover ceremony, so he told Janica that he lost something in the basement and asked for her help to find it. For a moment, he thought Janica would hate the idea, but she got all excited with Ed's request for help. Meanwhile, a certain person, Professor Claire, called Ed, saying that Professor Glass wanted to talk to him. Ed remembered that a while ago, Claire and the professor's assistant went to his cabin, and he wondered why. Despite replying that everything was fine, Ed was doubtful about Professor Glass's movements, as the ceremony was about to start the next day. In Professor Glass's room, Ed is surprised to find Ayla there too, and the girl's reaction to seeing the third-rate villain was fear. After all, she, Taylor, and Elvira were beaten in battle by him in Ophelia's hall, and at this moment, Ed with his sharpness knew something was wrong. What left him more uncertain in that situation was why Ayla was there at that moment, as she would be captured the next day, and why he was called there. He then quickly went to investigate the professor's documents to find out the reason. He read everything as fast as he could, but nothing indicated that the future he knows had changed. Then he found a document about him. It's the report that Professor Claire made while following him days ago. Despite this being different from normal, it's not enough to change the present. While he was using 100% of his brain, Ed was startled by the sound of the door opening. Professor Glass entered the room. Ayla made a mistake by asking for his help, jumping directly into the lion's mouth. The man, seeing the two, used his aspectual magic, time prison, and sent the girl somewhere. In response to this, Ed threw his dagger towards the spell and surprised the professor. A strong explosion took over the room. The effect was strong enough to create a shockwave, but it wouldn't be enough to defeat such a powerful mage. The professor, surprised, praised Ed for quickly deducing what was happening and for moving quickly. Glass stated that Ed, despite being just a student, showed great skill. The protagonist then asked why Glass was after him, as Ayla is enough for him to achieve his goals since she had an affinity with spectral magic. Glass responded with vague words, leaving Ed confused. Ed Roth Taylor realized that even if he can't escape, Glass will never leave him alone, which could ruin the whole scenario. Furthermore, if he gets kidnapped here, he would probably be trapped with Ayla in the secret lab. It's like a direct ride to stage 3 of the scenario. so Ed decided to surrender voluntarily. The professor used time prison to capture both for his evil plan. Why was Glass after Ed? I don't know, but hearing from Claire about Ed's deeds and how he was a genius, Glass thought it was like the boy had 48 hours a day. He couldn't imagine how much effort he put in. Glass didn't give it much importance until he realized Ed's combat ability. Although Ed is extraordinary, he clearly acted like a weak person. Moreover, he fights by meticulously analyzing his opponent, which is something someone with a lot of effort does, not someone with talent. The expression of this boy showed no sign of discomfort, which reminded the professor of something he lost in the past. To Glass, it was as if Ed was striving for achievements, and it was exactly this that caused his only daughter's death in the past. Silence reigned in the room while Glass agonized. This was the perfect moment for Mug to escape, quickly going to his cabin, where the adorable Janica awaited her secret love. Before we get to Janica, we need to tell a parallel story. A certain elderly traveler, upon returning home after his journey through the southern continent, realized that there are many mysteries in the magical world to be discovered. This elder had as a master the archmage Sylvania. Years after her death, he still missed her. Like any person, he had regrets and wished to distort reality to see his master smile again. But in his own words, what is lost is lost. The sadness of loss strengthened him. His words to his granddaughter Lucy were for her to be strong. A few years later, in his last breaths of life, he left his legacy behind and his grimoire with all his knowledge and magic. This legacy and sadness was left to little Lucy. These tears make me cry too. Losing someone is the most painful thing for a heart. This same little one now misses a certain person and doesn't know how to deal with the loss. She hides a great wound in her heart. For her, relief was materialized in that small bag of dried meat, and it was gone. When he went in search of more dried meat to soothe his heart, he saw Janica, who was preparing dinner for Ed, and at that same moment, a certain magical spirit said some words that made Janica furious as if she were Madara herself. Lucy could only wonder if they had stolen her dried meat. At the Sylvania Academy, the clandestine transfer ceremony of the Wise One's sealed grimoire was taking place. Scholars sought to learn, merchants sought to sell, and everyone was gathered in that hall. The elite of the elites was present. Among them, the one who drew the most attention was a mischievous girl with red hair and green eyes, none other than Lortel Ketchum. In front of her stood Obel Forsus, the director of the largest academy in the state. To the keen eyes of our redhead, it was clear that Obel had an image and age similar to that person, Ed's father, Crippen Rothlailer. Crippen approached her after the grimoire purchase to negotiate, asking her to hand it over to him. Indeed, this was Lortel's plan from the beginning: buy the grimoire and resell it at a higher price. She lied blatantly to Princess Fiona, saying she wouldn't resell the grimoire if she obtained it, and thus Fiona gave such a high price for the resale to Crippen, who accepted without hesitation. Before leaving, Crippen informed her that his adoptive father had hired a group of mercenaries to go to the academy. This information was not just information but a warning to Lortel. Now, with the sealed grimoire, information about Elt, and a possible exorbitant resale in her hands, all preparations were complete. The book in front of her was the personification of great profit, but the smile on her face was not of happiness for a successful deal but rather a ticket to the heart of her first love, the third-rate villain. Suddenly, a sudden attack and a dense miasma took over the place. Golems appeared in the room, and while the director dealt with them, Lortel realized it was a premeditated attack seeking the grimoire. The concern on Lortel's face was evident as she had just lost her free pass to Ed's beautiful body. Lortel was on the verge of crying over what had happened. Someone appeared, placed their hands on the grimoire, and then used magic to disappear in front of everyone, and that was how she lost something so valuable. And so the final chapter of the second act began with the War of Glass conquest. Up to this point, Ed had been captured. Janica was furious upon discovering this, and Lortel had lost her chance to win over Ed. Let's go to the secret lab, where Ed, whether he likes it or not, is considered the greatest villain of all time, according to Isla. While she screamed and cursed Ed, a mysterious voice asked for silence. It was the researcher Kum, whose beauty was comparable to his cruelty. Kum warned that if Ayla continued to scream, a terrible demon would awaken. He said a few things, but Ed just mocked the man, and the man's bald head got sweaty seeing the captive so calm. Ed was in a tough situation and could only wait for Taylor to come and save his childhood friend. When he passes by the library, it will probably be devastated. Despite this, Ed's plan remains the same: obtain all the recipes for himself. He drew the attention of Taylor's childhood friend, as he would have to deal with her anyway. She responded with aversion, threatening to scream at every sudden move Ed made. He tried to explain that he had nothing against her, and that if he wanted to do something, he would have done it already. But the girl just said it was a lie. After all, he is Ed. This left him without patience now, so Ed just shouted for her to stop the nonsense and sit until Taylor arrived. At the mention of her secret love's name, the girl questioned if Ed had the right to say his name, and the villain's response surprised her. Why wouldn't he? Ed apologized to Ayla for what happened in the admission exam, but he had his reasons, and when they fought with Glaskin, he also helped. Ayla listened attentively to Ed's words and was speechless. How could Ed Roth-Taylor apologize to someone, perhaps realizing he was being sincere? Meanwhile, Mug, Ed's magical spirit, appeared, desperate for his master's well-being. He followed the magical traces to the lab, apologizing for taking so long. Ed, with the attitude of an older brother, calmed Mug, praising him for finding him. Ayla asked if Ed could control spirits now, as until yesterday, he was terrible with basic magic. Ed replied that it was none of her business. Desperate, Ayla asked if Mug could ask the professors for help, but Ed refused, fearing distortions in the scenario. Mug explained that despite not having physical strength, he dodged several monsters to get there. He also mentioned that Janica was furious and would destroy any enemy she encountered. Janica, the cute black belt girlfriend, was on her way to save Ed. Besides her, Lucy, the granddaughter of a great mage, was also on her way, determined to find Ed. Mug asked Ed not to worry, as help was on the way. This left our villain furious because that wasn't what he wanted. That son of a gun didn't do what he was told. Finally, Ed calms down and throws Mug and shouts for Cum, saying he changed his mind and needed to get out of there. Cum, with a sarcastic smile, stated that Ed was just a mediocre student and couldn't do anything against him. After his words, Cum left, laughing. Ayla asked what was wrong with Ed. He himself said they should wait for Taylor to come to save them. Despite everything, Ed and Mug used this scene to secretly steal the jailer's keys and were free from their prisons, ready to face the next challenges. However, this doesn't apply to the girl, and he put her behind bars again. Before she could say anything, Ed looked at her coldly, telling her to stay quiet and only respond with yes or no. Ed stated that there are many experiments with demons out there, and it's very dangerous. She should stay here and warn them that Ed escaped. Besides, she can't even run because she's weak. Just stay here and obey. The girl wasn't answering his question, so with his eyes of a true villain, he asked, yes or no? Despite hesitating, she answered yes, she could do as he said. In that case, Ed left as quickly as possible, saying he would resolve everything. He accepted the small variables of possible futures and was confident he could handle any problem. His stats had increased significantly, and with the information he had, he could face any challenge. However, there were certain variables he couldn't handle alone. If he encountered Janica or Lortel, the situation would be different. But Ed, who played this game exhaustively, knew there was no game route that no player was able to survive, an entirely invincible enemy. It was bad. Ending number 27. Lucy, the lazy one. Even if you tried on purpose, it would be challenging to meet the requirements for this route, but if certain conditions were met, if after the incident Professor Glass and Lucy Merrill met, it would awaken the hostile side of the little dried meat devourer. That's why Ed was furious, because Mug said she was also coming. Our villain now needs to do everything possible to prevent that girl from meeting Glass today. Elsewhere at the Sylvania Academy, Jix, in his quest for physical form, was surprised by Taylor, who rushed in asking for his help. He was worried because his childhood friend had been captured. The routes Taylor would have to pass through to reach his dear friend were the main hall, the underground sewers, the spiritual library, the monster research center, and the deepest part of the lab. According to Ed, the monster research center was the most difficult, as Cum controlled all the monsters. However, at this moment, it would be easier to deal with Cum since all the monsters were confined. The only thing Ed has to intervene in is that Lucy encounters Glass and she becomes uncontrollable. The biggest problem was the librarian spirit Reina, who was ready to attack anyone who approached. Ed, being a nerd in this game like a good Dark Souls player, memorized all of Reina's patterns, so fighting her wouldn't be a problem. However, Ed knew Reina would give Taylor a significant experience in today's battle, so he preferred to avoid the fight. In later scenarios, there will be various enemies that Taylor won't be able to defeat without his swordsman form. If he hasn't trained enough, the upcoming challenges will be even harder. According to the original plot, Taylor will make significant progress during the second episode, and all his encounters up to that point will help him gain more experience and level up his stats. And Reina is one of those challenges that will make Taylor grow even more. So Ed's plan is to act stealthily in the library, grab only a few tools he needs, and make a run for it. He checks what he needs now, then looks at other things he doesn't need now, and convinces himself he needs to come back here after Taylor completes his mission. Leaving these valuable things here would be regrettable. Ed decided to take what he needed and leave as quickly as possible. However, A sudden earthquake made shelves fall, drawing the attention of the spiritual librarian Reina, who noticed the visitors. Ed and Mug were in trouble, but before dealing with that, let's go back 30 minutes before the earthquake. During the attack in the room where the sealed grimoires were being exchanged, Loratel was impatient. She herself told the director that if the sale of the sealed grimoire wasn't discreet, it would ruin the reputation of the Sylvania Academy. It was shameful it had been stolen during a ceremony where all members of the academy were present. The director promised to take action to recover the grimoire, and no matter what Professor Glass' plan was, it wouldn't succeed. The director's words left Loratel confused. He decided he should tell her the essential facts, mentioning the three main taboos that distort the laws of nature, distorting the flow of time, and challenging human destiny: the quest for immortality, the resurrection of the dead, and time travel. Loratel, surprised, questioned if Glass was trying to perform experiments with resurrection magic. If that were the case, did Director Obel also know about it? The director denied the accusations but claimed to be curious. He mentioned that Sylvania had the habit of saying the most talented propelled the world's progress. Glass' daughter, wanting to impress her father and show great talent, ended up dying. Obel then asked if Glass could complete a resurrection spell that could bring the dead back to life. Loratel was stunned to hear the man's words, and then news interrupted the conversation. Someone reported that Taylor was seen chasing Glass, who fled to the underground. He not only stole the grimoire but also captured students, including Taylor's childhood friend. Loratel, surprised and furious upon hearing that Ed Roth Taylor and another girl were also captured by Glass. Obel is the greatest sorcerer of this era, and he said he would take responsibility, so waiting here is the most rational thing to do. But Loratel went to the window and, with her binoculars, tried to see the cause of these vibrations: a giant spirit carrying a beautiful girl crying and, at the same time, furious for kidnapping her great love. If even her rival was acting, Loratel decided she couldn't stay here waiting. After all, despite the director saying he would take responsibility, he wasn't doing anything now. She put on her hood and ordered her team of merchants to follow her, for she would enter the battle too. Dorrit, in her third year, and the best in alchemy in the entire school, was also involved. Although she didn't stand out much in her first year, Professor Glass saw her true potential, and she believed his dubious actions had a purpose. However, dealing with the fury of someone in love is not easy. The power of love is as strong as that of friendship. Janica, determined, was looking for her beloved and faced anyone who stood in her way. "Where is my man?" she screamed. Dorrit didn't withstand the danger and died from an overdose of fear. Not getting any answers, Janica decided to move forward along the path the spirit had mentioned before, but now the girl realized her fury had blinded her, and she didn't remember anything after hearing Ed was kidnapped. Dorrit started making noises, and then Janica snapped back to reality and realized she made the girl have an attack and decided to be merciful and cover the girl. At that moment, she put the cloth over the wrong place, or she really visited Queen Elizabeth. The most important thing here is that Loratel also arrived at the place. Our mischievous redhead knew that Janica Faylover was the most powerful student in the academy, except for Lucy, of course. Either way, Loratel knew Janica would destroy all the sewers and cause a great commotion to ensure Ed's safety. She has the power to destroy everything and carry Ed in her arms as if he were a princess being rescued by the hero. She couldn't accept this future. Loratel went to Janica and said she should know Ed had already been rescued. After a battle, he was seriously injured and returned to the camp in the forest. Janica, with her killer instinct, questioned why Loratel was telling these lies to her. She was the first to arrive and knew there hadn't been a battle yet. Despite not being very smart, Janica was very perceptive when it came to Ed, Loratel had to admit. Janica then questioned the little red hood of greed. Why did she bring merchants to a battle? Is this really a smart decision? Janica said she'd asked Lucy for help. That is real help. At that moment, while the two girls had a contest to see who deserved the heart of the villain, Ed Roth Taylor, more, they both agreed that the most important thing was his safety. Each decided to cover one side of the sewers to find the place faster. While this would make them faster, it was also a way to compete to see who would find him first. A race to save and win the heart of the horrible villain who suddenly became a hero and warmed the hearts of both girls. And back to the library was the earthquake that made Ed get discovered, caused by Janica looking for him. No, when he was face to face with Reina, the ceiling was destroyed, and then Lucy entered the place as if she were a lazy comet. Even without trying, she had defeated Reina. Lucy woke up a few minutes ago and just won the race for Ed's heart. She just woke up and already resolved everything because, according to her, she was just bored and came to help our dear Ed. To do this, she crossed the mountains like a missile. Meanwhile, at the Sylvania Academy, the director is asked if he will just stand by and do nothing to stop Glass. He responds that this is a great opportunity for the students to prove their potential. Honestly, what kind of school school is this? It only has useless teachers. This is the easiest job in the world. According to the director, Jix and Taylor have assembled a rescue team for Ayla. Elvira and others have already started to mobilize. The author uses this approach to avoid involving the director of the continent's most famous academy, believing in the students even though the school's treasure has been stolen and the students kidnapped. Lucy, all excited, asks if Ed has any jerky to share. Of course not. The search for jerky didn't go well, so she decides to take another nap. Ed knows that both Janica and Lortel will come for him. Taylor's growth will be sufficient if he overcomes the remaining challenges, since the boss has already been defeated by our little jerky devourer. However, regardless of Taylor's growth, the biggest problem is that if Lucy encounters Glast, everything will collapse. To prevent this, Ed asks her to stay with him, which surprises her of course. Not knowing exactly what to answer, he remembers the encouraging words of the adorable Janica when he was in a coma. He tells Lucy that she is strong and that by her side he will feel safe. Therefore, she should stay with him. While she is looking for jerky, Ed loses his patience and tells her to forget about the jerky and just stay with him until they get out of there. She immediately responds, "If you want to leave, it's easy. I'll get you out of here quickly." Despite having to take care of certain matters before they leave, it won't be that easy. Even so, our little one reluctantly agrees. However, she has one favor to ask. "I'll stay by your side, but I need to take my nap." That's how Lucy is. Everything is happening in a way that wasn't supposed to, and because of that, Ed just grabs what he needs and leaves as quickly as possible to meet Janica and Lortel. Meanwhile, in a certain library, with a sudden attack of monstrous bats, Ed doesn't stand still. He makes bat barbecue, showing his proficiency in magical elements and mana resonance gradually increasing. While Ed is busy taking Lucy away in the race against Janica, Lortel is at an advantage, although there is already a winner in this race. Suddenly, Lortel realizes she genuinely wants to help someone with the purest intentions, feeling a new sentiment that cannot be bought with money. Her heart begins to beat fast, and her face starts to burn. It's the same feeling she had the last time. Where does this sound I hear coming from somewhere close by? Lortel thinks to herself, but she has known for a long time what makes her heart beat so fast. Before she could say these words to herself, an explosion occurs and someone lightly calls Lortel's name. Surprised to see this person in front of her, with the desire to help her, Ed appears, filled with magical gadgets, saying, "I was kidnapped." Ed asks for help carrying his recipes, and Lortel, seeing all those recipes, automatically calculates their worth. But calculations aside, Lortel, thinking she won the race, asks Ed if he was in danger. Before she could say, "My beloved, don't worry because I came to save you," Ed interrupts, saying he was indeed in danger. But thanks to Lucy, now in her 10th nap on his back, he is safe. For Lortel, already anxious, the competition for Ed's heart now includes Lucy. Lortel thought she had a clear advantage over Janica, being more proactive, even managing to get a kiss from Ed. Despite being so nervous, she thinks about taking control. Ed, with his charm, melts hearts, acts first, and says he is grateful to have her around and asks for her help. Just hearing the words of our villain, expressing gratitude for having her around, makes her as red as her own hair. But to both their surprise, an interruption occurs. A visibly exhausted man arrives to warn of a big problem. Meanwhile, elsewhere, our hero Taylor and his team play their roles. Clayton, always fearful, and Elvira, with a strong temperament, are also making an effort. Taylor meets Elvira and her group and asks for help to save Ayla. A new character enters the scene, a self-proclaimed romantic prophet, smiling as she states they will soon encounter a strong opponent. As she points in the direction of the powerful monster, a large explosion confirms the girl's theory, and a giant monster emerges from the flames. The enemy, however, has already been defeated by Janica, determined to protect her beloved. Jix greets the new ally while the others prepare to fight, knowing she was a major enemy they faced in the past, so they are sure she is an enemy again. However, a misunderstanding occurs. Janica, aware of the situation, knows that Claire is to blame, but resolving this will be complicated because of her past with Taylor's group. Jix tries to calm Taylor, reminding him that the focus is on saving his childhood friend. At that moment, Ed arrives and changes the atmosphere, asking everyone to stop, intensifying the misunderstandings. Janica soon worries about Ed being kidnapped. Taylor's and Elvira's group are even more concerned now, knowing that besides Janica, Ed, whom they discovered to be very powerful, and Lortel, also a demon, were together and on their way. It was not guaranteed they could defeat just Janica, but seeing Ed, Taylor feels his chance to defeat him now to zero. However, Ed surprises by passing him and asking him to hurry because his childhood friend is waiting. Ed leaves the main role to Taylor. Our villain, Ed Roth-Taylor, has to take care of matters only he knows, the variables triggered by his existence, including a situation at the academy. Elt's adoptive father, an important figure, is coming to interfere again. For those wondering how Ed knows the situation and needs to face an old old adversary, the Golden King. It was the gentleman who informed that Big Shot was coming to the academy. Lortel already expected her adoptive father's involvement, as the father-in-law hinted at it when he failed to purchase the grimoire from her. Taylor remains silent, questioning Ed's actions. Despite all the adversities he will face, Ed knows that Taylor is the main character in this story, and because of that, he is the final representation of this scenario. As Ed heads off to deal with the problem, a slight silence overtakes him. After this silence, to Taylor's surprise, Ed, using few words, sincerely wishes him good luck. Even though Taylor doesn't need motivational words from this villain, seeing Ed leave that place somehow affects the protagonist's perception. Folks, please tell me if you like this story, and say which girl our villain should choose. Janica is unsure about what is really happening when suddenly, Ed apologizes, saying they need to hurry and don't have time to explain. Janica shouts with all the strength in her voice that once again, he is going to get hurt. Do they really think they can handle the Golden King Kelchin on their own? These are her words. Janica says she doesn't know all the details, only that Ed was just kidnapped and barely escaped, and with a trembling voice, she says that a few days ago he had a breakdown from overwork and now he's trying to do something dangerous again. With the best intentions, Janica doesn't want to see him hurt once more. Our protagonist knows that this isn't his problem and that it won't be easy to deal with Kelchin. However, he knows that for the mission's success, Lortel will need his and Janica's help. Knowing this, Ed hopes that Lortel can convince Janica to help now, but to his surprise, Lortel's words go against his thoughts. She says that Janica is right and Ed shouldn't be involved in this situation. It would only be selfish on her part. The right thing to do now is to take him to a safe place. On one hand, Ed feels happy to see that both are getting along, but now is not the time for rest, he thinks to himself. He leaves the two girls stunned by saying that helping Lortel is not just business. It's important to him. Janica was on the verge of acting like a captain while questioning the meaning of this. Lortel, hearing this, didn't know how to react. A few seconds later, they resume running towards their goal. Ed says they don't have time to waste now, but he also tries to explain that it's not just business because there's another reason. However, he doesn't know how to explain his true motivation to her. Janica then gets anxious and says she already understands everything. If Lortel loses control of her business, the supply of goods he contracted from her will be lost. So this is a bigger problem than just her business. This motivation seemed great to Ed, so he says she is very smart and understood everything. This calmed the situation between the girls. The scene up to this point is complete chaos. It even talks about Dorit, how heartless Taylor is, and that she even killed her when she passed through here. We all know that the monster that came through here is much more beautiful than Taylor. Janica was so blinded by her anger that she didn't give the girl a chance to defend herself. The real monster here is her, and Janica screams that she is not heartless. Ed then realizes that it was she who ran over the poor girl. How frightening. Finally, they continue moving forward until they see the light at the end of the tunnel, and when they finally emerge, they find bodies strewn about and an unwanted figure waiting for them. To Ed's surprise, his father-in-law was furious with Lortel. He says he taught her very well. The girl left no clues, but it only took threatening the right person to get her information. The man apologizes to Lortel. He couldn't refuse. Ult says that even the fake smile she uses he taught her. That's why it's a shame to have to eliminate her for her betrayal. With a snap of his fingers, the fallen bodies rise as zombies and quickly attack the target. Luckily, our waifu Lortel manages to defend herself from the various attacks, calling her father a coward and challenging him to a fair fight. However, this is the difference between Lortel and her adoptive father. He is a coward, and so our villains and heroes are surrounded by the best mercenaries on the continent, commanded by Lortel's adoptive father himself. Elt says that excluding Lortel, the lives of the others don't matter. They can shoot to kill. He orders the mercenaries to attack, and a horde of arrows heads towards Ed and Janica. However, our villain knows he can count on Janica by his side, and everyone knows this girl is a passionate monster. His confidence is such that he didn't even blink when one of the arrows came very close because he knew that Janica wouldn't allow him to be hit by soldiers. The girl took the lead and only told him to be careful. These people's attacks are dangerous. Ed then thanks the girl for facing the danger with him, but our third-rate villain was observing Elt in the background. That guide is different from the others. A magic he prepared is called Belur's Prejudice, a legendary item that suppresses mana around it for 10 minutes. Ed knows that it costs dozens of gold coins, just like Alvira's potion. Its effect is to dispel all magic when activated. This is dangerous. Although the girls are powerful mages, they cannot face warriors with swords. Is this dangerous? His group consists only of mages. Lortel recognizes the danger and shouts to Ed that Elt was prepared. The protagonist, on the other hand, was still calm in this situation. He even asks the villain what he will do about the academy. How does he plan to handle it when when they find out what happened here. Elthan says it doesn't matter. Dealing with them is better than dying here. Ed knows that Elth should be a third-rate villain like him, who should have been eliminated from the main story a long time ago. The Golden King should only be the villain around Loratel, one of the main heroines, a corrupt man who eliminated her real parents just to take power, someone who is hated by the true evil and would do anything for money, an absolute villain. Ed feels no empathy for this person. This villain is constantly getting in his way. If he stays alive and keeps changing the story's path, Ed isn't sure if he can fix things, and this is his story now. That's why he has no pity in doing this. Ed says to wake up now, Lucy, wake up and plant your feet on the ground. Our little lazy witch whispers that there's too much noise here, and then opens her eyes. I can't contain my excitement, folks. Just Lucy's presence is enough to overcome the mana restriction device. Her aura is absolute. Lucy the sloth is awake. If we go back several years in the past, while Archmage Glock was writing his travel diary in his humble cabin, Lucy was lazy as always. Her grandfather always tried to teach his granddaughter that, despite being blessed with talent, she should never stop studying. Her grandfather used to tell her to be careful with the loneliness that would slowly take over her life. Glock believed that power and strength bring the bitterness of loneliness because they push people away. Therefore, her grandfather asked his granddaughter to promise 3 things. First, that she would never kill anyone. Lucy should do everything possible not to stain her small hands with blood. These memories passed through the girl's mind, for at this moment her energy was emanating so strongly that any magic she used could kill these people. The mercenaries who had gone through their entire lives, through various life or death missions, had a keen survival instinct. All their senses were pointing to one thing. In this situation, everyone was going to die. Their instincts were screaming at them. They couldn't even react, so Lucy walked past them, emanating her aura as if they were cockroaches. Elthan shouted that they were crazy and should leave immediately. They knew her magic was invincible for them, but if they caught the girl off guard, maybe they had a chance. Faster than the reflexes of a swordsman, the girl saw the man and, with her fingers, just compressed mana to attack him. With a slight movement of her fingers, she pierced the man in half and threw him dozens of meters away, exploding him in the distance. All the others felt the confirmation of their instincts. Elt, in fact, had not yet activated his magical item, but he needed a bit more time for that. This was what was on his mind, but when the girl focused her attention on him and asked if he was the leader, because if he was, she only needed to defeat the leader to resolve the situation. Before she fired again, Ed put his hand on Lucy's shoulder and called out to her, saying she shouldn't go that far. His words were interrupted when a strong earthquake caught everyone's attention. The origin of the tremor was the effects of gigantic magic. The lightning bolts exploding across the sky were followed by a luminous trail that gave rise to mana buildings. This was Professor Glass's magic, an advanced aspectual magic that distorts the laws of nature. He saw this happen. Ed immediately thought this was perfect. The timing was perfect. In the original storyline, this was the moment when Taylor would defeat all the underground monsters and become stronger. All the people who needed to be with his group were with him, and at this moment, it was when Glass would begin his forbidden resurrection magic. This means that the original scenario was progressing without problems. Of course, there are different variables from the original. Janica and Loratel are confused because they have no idea what this magic is and its effect. But everything would be fine if he was there. More than that, everything was going well, but Lucy's words were unexpected. The girl recognized and asked if those were the 10 magical towers that absorb aspectual magic. In that case, she knew what could be done with it. The atmosphere was dark, but her face was lit with the possibility of it being resurrection magic. Ed was frozen because this was a big problem. In the original story, Lucy was supposed to wake up only after Glass was defeated by Taylor and his group. The girls slept during the great battle. However, in the route where Lucy woke up during phase 1 of the plan, she went to Professor Glass, confronted him, and the two made a deal. Glass proposed that the person he would resurrect from the dead was not Sylvania, but her disciple, Archmage Glock, and that's how Lucy became an enemy, and this was the bad ending number 27 of the game. Lucy the Sloth was invincible. The best and most addicted players around the world tried to win the route where Lucy became an enemy, but no one ever managed to defeat Lucy, and now our protagonist's plans were just ruined because the girl recognized the magic and was tempted to go to the person responsible for it. While she was thinking about it, Ulti used those seconds to successfully activate the magical item Belleru Prejudice. The legendary item, once activated, drains all the mana around it, leaving everyone around without mana for 10 minutes. This happens to everyone, but the biggest source of mana is the first to be drained. Lucy has her mana drained, and with that, Elt shouts to the soldiers that they have a chance now. All the mages are useless in combat. Seizing the opening, one of the mercenaries attacks Ed from behind. The brat raises his hand, but it's useless without mana. However, the mercenary is surprised as a wind spell throws him far away. Ed Roth-Taylor's mana was in perfect condition. Elt was certain the item had been activated, so why on earth did this happen? The man wasn't wrong, but upon observing Lucy, he noticed something that terrified his soul. Even a legendary item has its limits. It was as if it were trying to drain the ocean with a simple jug. After reaching its limit by draining only the girl, the item exploded and its effect ended. Lucy's mana was infinite. Lucy, after seeing the attempt of the worm in front of her, said with her cold eyes that she needed to go to a certain place now. Elt didn't have the battle experience of the mercenaries, but his instincts screamed that his death was inevitable. His death was a matter of seconds. He, one of the most powerful men in this country, was like a cockroach being crushed by the feet of this monster. Lucy was about to fire a compressed mana attack when she heard Ed's voice saying she should know this would kill the man. Not even Elt understood why the boy stepped in his way and said it wasn't cool to kill others, so stop now. In her thoughts, it was strange that Ed was defending Elt's life, but she remembered her grandfather's words about not killing anyone with her power. The most important person in her life made her promise never to kill someone, and because of this, she realized Ed wasn't concerned about Elt's life, but about her breaking that promise. In that case, the worm could live. Lucy decides to eliminate the villain and goes to the one responsible for the forbidden aspectual magic. Ed knew this, but still asked where she was going. Lucy knew that whenever she talked to Ed, it was unpredictable, but even knowing that, she couldn't help but be surprised. Ed asked if she knew she would regret it. This question she didn't expect. It was as if this boy could read her feelings and her mind. Those were the only words he said. Our protagonist didn't try any other argument to stop her from going. His only chance was that his words would reach her memories. In the past, Locke wrote his travel diary and left it for his only granddaughter. Lucy always heard her grandfather talk about how what is lost is lost. Accepting this was what made people stronger, and that was the last sentence of the book, dedicated especially to her when he departed. Locke died happy because it was his granddaughter who illuminated his life and took him out of loneliness. These memories passed through her mind, and in response to Ed's question, she answered no, and then disappeared before his eyes. His words failed. With Elt's defeat, the mercenaries fled by boat, while Janica reminded them that if she changed her mind, everyone would die. Ed then ran to Trix Hall. She let Lortel handle delivering Elt to be arrested. He ran as fast as he could and found Lucy sitting at the top of the building. He knew she would be here thinking. After Glock died, he donated all his fortune to Sylvania Academy. This place was made in honor of her grandfather and the legacy of the legendary Archmage, somehow, which Lucy didn't know. Ed even knew about this and found her again. While she was looking at the place that reminded her of her dear grandfather, Lucy asked if the protagonist had some jerky with him. Ed didn't have any jerky, which made Lucy think that such conversations were common between them. She said she was just there reminiscing about the old times and gestured for him to sit beside her. It seems that Ed is afraid of heights. Meanwhile, Lucy confessed her feelings. She used to cry a lot back then and was so sad, but at some point, she stopped being sad. Ed knew what she was talking about regarding grief, but he asked why she stopped being sad. Lucy thought seriously about it and concluded that too much time had passed. And thinking about it, she knows that even if she revives her grandfather, she will lose him again after some time because he is too old. Besides, she realized he was already prepared for death. She wasn't and didn't want to be angry again for losing him again. Furthermore, she knew it would be an offense to resurrect the Archmage who studied magic all his life using such a terrible forbidden magic. Lucy commented that she knew from the beginning that this would be selfish, and yet she wanted to do it. These were her words to Ed, but the villain questioned if she was really okay after telling him this. The truth is, she might have changed her mind now just on a whim and might go back, so he wants to be sure. When she replied, something in him said the girl would ask for jerky again, but instead, Lucy asked for his shoulder, and this scene moved my heart, folks. Ed understood that Lucy asked him to sit beside her for something like this. Ed, observing the energy towers emitting great energy, could only think about how no one in the world was more passionate about aspectual magic than Professor Glass. This was because the man couldn't accept losing his daughter. Lucy's tears and her sobbing as she recited the words her grandfather left for her in his book about how it is important to understand that what is lost were so painful, but she accepted it despite the pain. It tells us that he understands this pain well enough, and so the protagonist sat beside Lucy for a long time while observing Glass magic. For him, the starry sky was bigger than usual, and it was also so beautiful. The magic required a great offering in exchange for such powerful power, and then we see Taylor and his allies who finally reached Glass. Ayla was in the sky ready to offer herself to perform this magic. Glass tried to prevent the students from interrupting interrupting him, and this was also the final phase of episode 2. Glass attacks are very powerful, and seeing his childhood friend in that state left Taylor distracted. So Jix blocked Glass's attack and shouted at him to save his girl before it was too late. This brought Taylor back to reality, and he ran to do so. Glass was motivated, but the man mysteriously blamed his nearsightedness. Because of it, he couldn't see anything without his glasses, and that's why he let Taylor hit him directly. Really, people are complicated. Glass says to himself that the life of a teacher must be boring, always sitting in the lab reading old books, always planning to teach the students. But still, he always saw that the world out there, through his windows, was always changing. People always came to talk to him and ask for his help. A dedicated student, a troublesome teacher. The weather always changed every year out there, and he never saw it. The academy's director, even being so important, also always came to visit him and offer a cup of tea. He used to be surrounded by people seeking his attention, and all those years he only had eyes for his work, which was actually motivated by researching aspectual magic to revive someone. Over time, people disappeared, but the painful memories didn't vanish. So even fatally cut by Taylor, Glass found the strength to continue and activate his magic. Taylor was thrown far away, and his powerful sword broke. Glass had completed his magic for a small time travel. Terrified by what was happening, Taylor's friends protected him and went to him when he was thrown so far to the ground. Alvera and the others were all paralyzed by the effect of the time prison. Jix realized this was magic and quickly shouted for Taylor to avoid it and pulled him out of the trajectory, while he himself was frozen. With that, the boy hung on the edge of the building with his sword and wasn't affected by the aspectual magic. Glass saw this and, with his sad look, admitted that his vision sometimes gets bad because of the nearsightedness. But he also said to himself that it was because in the darkness he could better remember her face. Yes, that's why he sometimes couldn't see without glasses. After a few seconds, Taylor managed to climb back to the top of the building. Then Glass furiously shouted that there was no way to stop him. His powerful magic is something beyond what any student could face, but even so, it was cut to pieces by Taylor. This surprised even the powerful professor. That swordsman form is incredible. His magic was reaching its limit, and the effect was about to be nullified. Continuing with this would cost using the rest of his life in exchange, and he was ready to do it. However, an ice magic hit him and stopped him. Jix freed himself before everyone else and attacked him. Then, all of Taylor's other friends joined in and attacked with their strongest magic. Was this the end of Glass? A strong explosion lit up the entire academy sky, and a girl fell softly into her hero's arms. Taylor managed to arrive in time and save Ayla as Ed expected. Now, as for Glass, the professor was defeated, and all he had left was to admit his defeat and try to join his daughter in the other world, as she won't come to this one. In this outcome, the man fell from the top of his building almost lifeless. Glass couldn't get the sad memories out of his mind, but something inside him made him resist and try one more time. That's why the professor used his magic to save himself and land safely in the forest near the building. Even though he didn't die from the fall and used magic to stop the bleeding, it was evident that he would die tonight. However, even so, Ed went there to confirm something. Folks, this is the end of Glass. What does our third-rate villain want with the world's most indecisive professor? Leave your comment and tell me if Lucy beat Lortel in the race to the villain's heart. Legend has it that those who like the video will find a Lortel in their life tomorrow.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on upcoming videos. Leave a like if you enjoyed it and share with your friends. See you in the next video. Bye for now.